Those years I was a mutant in Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26, Encounter, New Abilities. Mind if I sit here? The old man smiled and took off his gentleman's hat, sat down next to Wheeler, and asked Jean Grey across from him. The old man had meticulously combed gray hair, cold facial lines, and a pair of beautiful blue eyes. He was Magneto, Eric Lansher. Long time no see, Jean. Magneto greeted him, smiling and looking very kind. But Jean Grey's body was tense, and she said politely but vigilantly, Mr. Lansher, long time no see. Magneto called the waiter to order a cup of coffee, and said to Wheeler, young man, you did a good job at the bloody ball, but you were too kind to those humans. Wheeler raised his eyebrows, but Jean Grey took the lead and said, Mr. Lansher, Wheeler is a kind child. Kindness is a good quality, but you need to distinguish the objects of charity, Magneto said lightly, took a sip of coffee, and glanced at the two. You are so talented, but you stay in X school. Charles is simply wasting your talents, Jean Grey said indignantly. The school is good, the professor is also good, and we are living well. As a student of Professor X, she does not allow others to say bad things about Professor X, especially Magneto, who is completely contrary to Professor X's philosophy. Magneto smiled sarcastically. This does not mean that all mutants are good. That's why the professor has been working hard to eliminate people's prejudice against mutants and strive to promote harmonious coexistence between the two sides. Jean Grey refuted Magneto with a firm look in her eyes. Magneto held the coffee, stared at Jean Grey for a moment, then smiled and said, sorry, the way you looked just now reminded me of Charles, but, he paused, and said leisurely, humans and mutants are destined not to coexist. They are inferior creatures. Will you get along with fools on an equal footing? Without waiting for Jean Grey to refute, Magneto suddenly asked the silent one, Wheeler, what do you think? Huh? Wheeler, who was suddenly called out, was stunned. What do I think? I'll sit and watch. Wheeler muttered to himself and smiled. I'm just an insignificant little character. My opinion is not important. He didn't have the art of persuasion, and he didn't have the ability to make Magneto give up his decades of obsession and persistence with just a few words. Little character? No, our talents are all unique. Don't belittle yourself, kid. I'm optimistic about your future. Magneto's tone was sincere, like an old man encouraging his juniors. Wheeler said lightly, thank you. Magneto stood up and said to Wheeler, thank you for buying me coffee. Then he put on his hat and patted Wheeler on the shoulder gently. My child, the door of the Brotherhood is always open to all compatriots, including you. And he looked at Jean Grey, who was alert on the side, and smiled. Say hello to Charles for me. After speaking, he nodded politely to the waiter passing by and left quickly. Whew, ha. Jean Grey took a long breath, stood up quickly and said, I have to tell the professor that Magneto appeared here. Wheeler, you be careful here, and don't be fooled by Magneto's words. After saying this, Jean Grey left quickly. Wheeler was speechless. What are you afraid of? Magneto should be afraid of you. Muttering in his heart, Wheeler looked at the newly established relationship with an unexpected expression. Eric Lansher, Magneto, relationship stage, stranger, 30/100, world point generation speed, 5/day. The friendship degree is surprisingly not low. Waiter, pay the bill. Wheeler shouted, pressed the money under the cup and left quickly. He still had to protect Pepper. A week later, in Tony Stark's mansion, Wheeler's room. Wheeler looked at the world points in the system. His smile seemed to be welded on his face, and the corners of his mouth couldn't fall. Current world points. 3,205. After Tony's relationship reached the stage of friends, Pepper's relationship stage also reached friendly, and the growth rate of world points was much faster. In addition, what Wheeler is looking forward to more is that Logan's relationship is about to reach the next stage. What surprised Wheeler the most was that when the world tree refreshed to fixed fruits every month, because of the increase in the number of relationships, 4 new fruits, 2 silver and 2 bronze, were refreshed at a time, bringing the number of fruits on the world tree to 10 current number of fruits. 10, 6 bronze, 4 silver. If all these fruits are ripe, these are far away. Far away. Wheeler muttered, looking at one of the silver fruits and throwing the world points into it. After consuming 2,900 world points, the world tree shook gently, and the canopy-like crown flickered twice, and then in Wheeler's expectant eyes, the silver fruit emitted a faint silver light. Will it be used as material to feed other fruits? Absolutely impossible. Wheeler picked the fruit directly. The silver fruit quietly appeared in Wheeler's palm, emitting a faint silver light. What ability could it be? Wheeler looked forward to it and crushed it hard. The fruit turned into silver fragments and disappeared, and a ball of light appeared in Wheeler's palm. Control of your own energy, intermediate? Wheeler looked at the ability that was released this time, groaned, and the ball of light disappeared in Wheeler's palm. Has the control over the alien energy been enhanced? Wheeler felt it and felt that it was much easier for him to drive the alien energy, and the quantity had also increased. He could even easily do things that he couldn't do before. For example, Wheeler's eyes flashed with blue light, and a ball of blue energy appeared in his palm. Under Wheeler's control, the blue energy began to change shape, from playing cards to various cold weapons such as long swords, and finally condensed on the tip of Wheeler's index finger and began to spin wildly. Wheeler excitedly pointed his hand at the wall and made a shooting gesture. The next second, a tennis ball-sized blue energy flew out like a cannonball and landed on the wall. Boom! There was a loud bang, gravel flew, the wall was directly pierced, and a big hole appeared on the wall. Is it so powerful? What if the energy is compressed and then shot out? Wheeler is looking forward to it. I feel that the compressed energy should be released in advance. A ball of energy appeared in Wheeler's palm again. After the blue energy turned into a playing card, as Wheeler continued to inject energy, the originally illusory playing card became real. Wheeler held it in his palm, feeling the real touch of the playing card, and grinned with satisfaction. At this time, a steel figure with flames appeared in front of Wheeler after smashing Wheeler's door. Looking at the big hole in the wall, Tony said nervously, "Weller? What's the matter? Were you attacked?" Wheeler's face was full of embarrassment. "Good guy. He actually blew up his boss's house while testing his ability." "No." Wheeler's eyes drifted to the ceiling, and he said faintly, "I was not able to control the experiment well, Tony. P.S. I am receiving an infusion. Please vote for comfort." Chapter 27 Attack. Stark's house, on the lawn in front of the mansion. As the night deepened, bright lights illuminated the lawn, the moist sea breeze brought a hint of coolness, and the barbecue grill on the side also emitted an alluring aroma. Happy stood on the barbecue grill, busying himself, trying to grill every piece of meat and every piece of vegetable to the best state. Happy turned the beef ribs over piece by piece, sprinkled several seasonings on them, and a smile unconsciously appeared on his face. Sometimes, he felt that he was a chef in his previous life, so he could make such delicious barbecue now. In a while, his barbecue will surely surprise everyone. I guess they have already smelled the fragrance and can't wait. Happy raised his head confidently, and when he was about to show off to the three people, he saw Wheeler and the other two sitting at the beach table chatting about something. The laughter that rang out from time to time suddenly made Happy feel a sense of loss. "I feel like I'm the only one busy. Although he is a bodyguard, aren't Wheeler and Pepper also workers?" Angry, Happy poked a piece of steak with the grill tongs so that it could enjoy the burning of the flames more evenly. "Happy, it smells so good." The praise was carried to Happy's ears by the wind. Happy looked over and saw Wheeler looking at the sizzling barbecue with anticipation in his eyes. "It'll be ready soon," Happy responded, and suddenly felt that Wheeler was pleasing to the eye. A moment later, Happy came over with 2 plates of barbecue and a plate of grilled vegetables. Pepper hurriedly took the plates and put them on the dining table. Every piece of freshly grilled meat was charred and tempting, exuding a seductive aroma. "It looks great," Pepper praised. "I didn't expect that, Happy. You have such good cooking skills." Happy smiled happily. Tony tasted a piece and his eyes lit up. "Don't be a bodyguard, you can be my chef." Happy laughed out loud, and the corners of his mouth curled up happily. Wheeler ate a piece of meat, drank a sip of beer, enjoyed the coolness brought by the sea breeze blowing on his body, and squinted his eyes comfortably. "Woo! I haven't felt this comfortable in a long time." Happy's mouth was almost grinning to his ears. Nothing makes a chef happier than getting praise and recognition for the food he worked so hard to make. The 4 of them raised their beer glasses in tacit understanding and clinked them lightly. "For Happy's barbecue, to thank Wheeler for saving me and Tony, to celebrate that Wheeler can go to school tomorrow, to celebrate that Wheeler didn't blow up the plane." Wheeler looked at Tony and Happy speechlessly. "Can't you say something happy like Pepper?" But the next second, A happy smile broke out on his face and he shouted loudly, "Cheers!" After the refreshing beer went down, the four of them ate delicious barbecue, drank beer, and chatted. After this period of cleanup, the Middle East affairs came to an end for the time being, and it was time for Wheeler to leave. After all, Tony and Pepper no longer needed protection. Tony talked about the difficult experiences during this period and the glorious past of his lower body, which made Pepper roll her eyes again and again, but in return, Wheeler and Happy showed undisguised envy. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Pepper and Happy became much bolder and complained about Tony's absurd things in the past. Tony did not feel ashamed at all, but was full of pride. Wheeler talked about some of the battles he had experienced, which caused the three people to exclaim. Destroying gangs, fighting mutants, fighting in fighting cages, each story is impressive. The more they drank, the less barbecue they had. Happy stood up happily. "I'm going to barbecue. What do you want to eat?" "I've prepared a lot." Wheeler was about to speak, but suddenly saw two flames flashing in the distance like ghost lights. When he was wondering, he saw that the two ghost lights disappeared, and a sense of danger also rose in his heart. Without any hesitation, Wheeler stood in front of the three people. The next second, blue energy surged out of his palm, and a huge fireball flew over. The blue energy instantly changed its form, and a blue energy shield appeared in front of Wheeler. Boom! With a loud bang, the flames spread out. Tony's face changed, and he pulled the screaming Pepper back, while Happy took out his pistol and fired several shots at the place where the fireball appeared. "Fuck. What the hell is that?" Happy's voice trembled, but he stood firmly in front of Tony and the others. "Here it comes." With Wheeler's low shout, the fireball flew again. But this time, the blue energy shield in front of Wheeler began to shrink, turning into a palm-sized blue energy ball that flew out in a rotation. Boom! In the fierce explosion, the fireball was shattered again, and the gorgeous flames were like fireflies flying around with the sea breeze. Ignoring this beautiful scene, Wheeler instantly entered the super body state, and when a black shadow pounced on Happy, he punched the black shadow. The blue energy exploded and blew the black shadow away. "A black giant wolf? Is it him?" Wheeler raised his eyebrows and recognized the black shadow. Murat, the mutant he met in the Middle East. The black wolf adjusted its body, and its four sharp claws rubbed the ground, leaving several ugly marks on the neat lawn. Its violent eyes fell on Wheeler. "Get out of the way. You are not my target," a deep voice came out of the giant wolf's mouth. The wolf spoke. Happy looked at this scene in shock. Wheeler raised his eyebrows and said, "Why are you here? This has nothing to do with you." Murat took a step forward, and the dancing flames rose onto his claws. "Is this a new trick?" Wheeler narrowed his eyes, and a question mark appeared in his mind. "Is this a change in the opponent's ability, or a newly awakened ability, or something else? Since you let me go last time, I won't hurt you." The flames on Murat's limbs became hotter and hotter, making his claws feel like stepping on magma. "Now, get out of my way." With Murat's roar, flames exploded under his feet, and his huge body rushed straight towards Tony with several brilliant lines of fire. His target was the reactor on Tony's chest. As long as they had this thing, they could make steel suits, have a steel army, and change the world pattern. At that time, according to the agreement, they could live equally in the Middle East. Wheeler looked at Murat calmly, while the blue energy vines spread wildly on the ground. Boom, boom. The ground kept exploding, but Murat dodged flexibly and got closer and closer to Tony. In response, Wheeler still stood in place, but there were more and more blue vines on the ground, and the explosions became more and more frequent. "It's going to succeed." Looking at Tony retreating, Murat roared in his heart. But at this time, a mocking chuckle sounded clearly in his ears, and the energy vines all over the ground turned into a blue net as Wheeler swung his arms vigorously, and put Murat in it. P.S. Please vote for recommendation, monthly ticket, and follow me. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28 Reactor Lost. The blue energy net tightened, and the black giant wolf struggled like a beast caught by a hunter. Wheeler's eyes flashed, and the energy net quietly changed. It became extremely sharp. As he gained new abilities, he had more and more ways to use the energy of the other dimension. Murat struggled angrily, and the energy net cut wounds on his body. What is that? Looking at Murat's wounds, Weller frowned. The dense wounds did not bleed a drop of blood, but instead exuded a scorching heat, as if the magma was cut open. Even those wounds had just appeared, and under the lingering firelight, they had healed. Murat's healing ability has been strengthened? Looking at Murat, who was caught in the net, Happy shouted happily, "Great, what on earth is this?" Pepper was still shocked by the scene of the Black Wolf speaking. "Is it the one in the desert?" Tony asked. When he saw Wheeler nod, he said unexpectedly, "I thought you killed him." Wheeler looked at the struggling Murat, his eyes flickering. "I gave him a chance. You go to a safe place first. Leave this to me." Tony nodded, and did not let Wheeler kill Murat. At this moment, a shrill alarm sounded. "It's the laboratory. There are others." Tony screamed and ran to the laboratory, shouting, "Happy, protect Pepper. You leave here first." Tony was just an ordinary person before he put on his battle suit. If he encountered an enemy in the laboratory, he might be in danger. Wheeler frowned, blue energy surged in his palm, and then he bent down and pressed Murat's head. Murat suddenly stopped struggling, and the hot red light flowed wildly in his body, as if there was magma rolling in his body. "Ha!" Murat opened his mouth suddenly, and the blazing flames rolled towards Weller like a storm, while the red sharp teeth bit into the energy net. Weller quickly retreated, avoiding the flames, and moved his fingers lightly, and the sharp energy net exploded. Boom! A huge pit appeared on the ground with a violent sound, and grass and soil splashed everywhere. "Ah!" Murat wailed and flew out, hitting the wall like a ball of mud. His limbs were broken, his body was full of exploded wounds, and his mouth was glowing red, representing repair, like a broken doll thrown away by someone. But he still struggled hard to stop Weller. Weller walked over with an expressionless face and kicked the other man in the head, knocking him unconscious. Such mutants should not die here, nor should they continue to be used by those terrorists. This time may be an opportunity for Murat to see those terrorists clearly. Several thoughts flashed through Wheeler's mind, and he turned on his super body. Like a swift shadow, he rushed to Tony's laboratory. When he arrived at the laboratory, he saw only a mess. The laboratory was filled with thick smoke, and clusters of smoke were burning stubbornly in the laboratory. Under the control of Jarvis, the fire extinguishing system accurately extinguished these flames. There was no enemy in sight. Wheeler quickly glanced around and shouted loudly, "Tony!" There was no response. Wheeler looked grim and walked into the laboratory to look for Tony. Snap! A hand suddenly grabbed Wheeler's ankle. Wheeler subconsciously wanted to step on it, but when he saw the familiar face covered in dust, he resisted the urge to step on it. "Tony!" Pulling Tony up from the ground, Wheeler almost couldn't help laughing when he saw that gray coal ball. "Fuck. That bastard with red glow all over his body almost destroyed my lab," Tony cursed and asked loudly, "Jarvis, what did that bastard take away?" "A gift from Miss Potts to you, a gift from Pepper to me." Tony frowned and recalled, but he couldn't remember it. Jarvis thoughtfully projected a three-dimensional projection in front of Tony. "The old reactor?" Tony's face was very ugly. At the beginning, he asked Pepper to help her take down the old reactor and throw it away, but Pepper made the old reactor into a gift and gave it to him. He thought it was very commemorative and placed it in the laboratory. But he didn't expect the other party's goal to be this. Fuck, if this thing is copied, Tony didn't dare to imagine the serious consequences. "Jarvis, can you call up the image of the man just now?" Wheeler frowned and asked, thinking of Murat, who was still unconscious in the yard, and had a guess in his mind. "Okay," Jarvis responded, and a three-dimensional image of a man was projected. The man was bald, with a sinister look on his face, and it seemed like there was fire surging in his body. "Is it him?" Tony whispered, explaining to Wheeler, "He's the leader of that group of terrorists." Wheeler nodded, reminding Tony, "How did he know your home address, and more accurately the location of your laboratory, and even knew that you have a reactor here?" Tony lowered his head and thought. There were not many people who knew his home address, but there were only a few people who knew that he had built a micro-reactor and knew his home address. "Obadiah!" Tony shouted out a name in shock. Wait? If Obadiah was related to the terrorist leader who attacked him before, then he was caught in the Middle East last time. Tony's face became even uglier. Tony said coldly, "Jarvis, find Obadiah." "Yes, sir," Jarvis responded, and Tony began to put on his iron suit and prepared to fly over. After a moment, Jarvis' voice rang out, "Obadiah went to Stark Building half an hour ago and hasn't come out yet." He's in District 16. District 16. Tony was a little confused. At this time, Pepper and Happy, who were worried about Tony's safety and didn't go far, ran in. Pepper explained, "That's the new technology area that Obadiah established not long ago." At that time, he transferred most of the scientists in the weapons department. Tony nodded, and the mask was snapped off with a click. After leaving a hole in the ceiling, he disappeared into the night. At this time, Happy, who had been in a state of shock, finally reacted. "Tony Stark, my boss, he is Iron Man," Happy screamed, and seeing that Wheeler and Pepper looked calm, he said indignantly, "You actually knew it a long time ago?" Wheeler laughed softly and said, "I'll go see Tony." Pepper nodded frantically. If Wheeler went, she would be relieved. "Do you want Happy to drive you there?" "No thanks." Wheeler shook his head. "Too slow." As soon as he finished speaking, excitement flashed in Wheeler's eyes, and he entered a super body state. Then, a large amount of blue energy gathered on his back, and a pair of gorgeous blue wings grew from Wheeler's back. With a light flap of the blue wings, Wheeler flew up, and in the dull eyes of Pepper and the others, he cast little blue dots of light like fireflies, and disappeared in front of the two people. P.S. Please vote. Please read again. Please reward. The new book needs everything. Chapter 29, Death of Obadiah. Under the night sky, the stars are like a sea, and a gorgeous blue track passes by like a sharp arrow. Wheeler flapped the blue wings behind him, and the excitement on his face was still visible. After his control over his own energy improved and the alien energy could be materialized, Wheeler tried various tricks, and the control of these wings was the most difficult, and it was also the method that Wheeler was most satisfied with. "It's still a bit slow," Wheeler murmured, and decided to try the acceleration method he had imagined. The next moment, the fine and imperceptible energy explosion sounded behind him with every flap of his wings, and his speed suddenly increased. If you look closely, you can find that the feathers under the wings are constantly disappearing with the explosion. He is using the power generated by the energy explosion to increase his speed. This will increase the difficulty of control, but Wheeler is very excited. His idea was successful. "Yahoo!" Wheeler shouted, but was hit in the face by the wind, and hurriedly shut his mouth. It seems that he needs to use energy to make a mask or something. Thinking about ways to continue improving his abilities, Wheeler carried Murat, who was caught in the energy net, and flew towards the Stark building. At the same time, in the Stark Industrial Building, in the secretly created District 16, a silver steel armor was standing quietly. Compared to Tony's Iron Man suit, this steel armor was taller, but each piece of armor on the body seemed to be piled up. Although it did not look as smooth as the Iron Man suit, it gave people an ugly sense of deterrence. Looking at the steel armor, Obadiah's eyes were full of longing for the future. He gently stroked the cold armor, and the flame of ambition in his heart was burning. After seeing the empty chest of the armor, he couldn't help but curse. "Tony, you are such a fucking idiot." With a sigh, he couldn't help but say, "Those two greedy sandworms are too slow." "Sandworms? Who are you talking about?" A cold voice sounded behind him. Obadiah turned around, and the dissatisfaction on his face had disappeared. Haha, he walked towards Laser with a big laugh, stretched out his arms and hugged Laser tightly, and said excitedly, "My friend, you are finally back." Laser sneered and said, "Are the things ready?" "Of course. Just one order from me, and those things can be on the transport ship now," Obadiah said lightly. Laser nodded, took out the reactor from his arms and handed it to Obadiah. With his current strength, he was not afraid that Obadiah would go back on his word. Obadiah smiled lightly and made a phone call in front of Laser. It won't take long before those weapons will be obsolete, and he doesn't care at all. Now Obadiah looked at the steel armor he named Ironmonger with a fiery look, strode over, and began to install the reactor. In his design, the installation of the reactor is very convenient, that is, the battery can be replaced at any time, so it doesn't take much time. Soon, he can experience the feeling of Iron Man in person. But what he didn't notice was that Laser, who was standing not far behind him, walked over quietly with a sneer on his face. Buzz! With a slight sound, Ironmonger's chest lit up. Great! Obadiah's surprise stopped abruptly. He looked at the red palm that passed through his chest in pain, and turned into a corpse with his ambition and unwillingness. Sizzle! Laser pulled out his hand. And the blood had been evaporated by the high temperature of his hand. Idiot! Looking at Obadiah's body, Laser said sarcastically. If he hadn't found an abandoned design in the corner of the cave, Do you think you could have made this steel armor so quickly? And do you really think we still need the weapons you provide? Huh. Laser sneered and looked at the ironmonger who was standing quietly. Just take this thing back to his boss, and wait for his boss to copy it, then they can have as much as they want. Boom. Suddenly, an explosion sounded. Laser's expression tightened. Chasing so soon? Tui, Raza spitted at Obadiah's body and walked towards Ironmonger quickly. Meanwhile, Tony had already entered Area 16. Jarvis, lead the way for me, Tony said coldly. With Jarvis's scanning and guidance, he soon found Obadiah's body. Seeing the horrible hole in Obadiah's chest and his eyes widened with unwillingness, Tony's face was complicated. But he didn't have time to think about it. A dangerous red light flashed in his mask. Before he could react, a silver body that was several sizes bigger than him and was like a tank hit his back and knocked him out. Bang, bang. Tony was like a golden red bowling ball. After smashing 2 walls, he rolled on the ground and hit the 3rd wall. Fuck, Tony cursed angrily and shook his head, which was a little dazed. Go to hell. With an excited roar, Ironmonger's big guy suddenly jumped up and jumped towards him fiercely. Tony's palm spurted out flames, and he rubbed his body against the ground to avoid the attack. He kicked his feet on the ground and landed steadily. Hey! Stark, Leza, wearing Ironmonger, felt that he was invincible at the moment, and wanted to tear Tony into pieces immediately to avenge the destruction of the base. Boom, boom. Ironmonger ran towards Tony again, and even in the process of running, his feet continued to spurt out flames to speed up. At this moment, he was unstoppable. He was God. Suddenly, a missile with an inconspicuous flame landed on Ironmonger, and the slight impact sound was inconspicuous. But boom. In the violent explosion, Ironmonger was directly blown away, and his heavy body smashed the wall and fell on the street outside. The golden red figure followed closely and landed on Ironmonger, aiming his shining hands at Ironmonger's head and firing several palm cannons in succession. Bang! Ironmonger slapped Tony away and stood up from the ground with difficulty. Although Ironmonger's thick armor and huge size made him lose some speed, his relative strength and defense were also greatly enhanced. The next second, the two stood together again, causing chaos on the street. The crazy Ironmonger used all means to attack Tony. Rockets, bullets, and even cars that he picked up at random. We can't fight here, Tony whispered, and after breaking free from Ironmonger's entanglement, he flew into the air. Want to run? Laser sneered, chased after him, and fired several missiles at Tony's back. Tony tried his best to dodge, but was still affected by the exploding missiles and rolled down to the roof of Stark's building. Tony got up from the ground and was about to deal with Ironmonger's attack, but he saw that the reactor on Ironmonger's chest suddenly dimmed, and Ironmonger, who was flying in the air, waved his limbs randomly in the air, and fell from the air with a scream that resounded through the sky. Is this because the old reactor has run out of energy? Chapter 30 Event Point disappears. Ironmonger fell rapidly, and Tony was speechless. But when he saw the ground where Ironmonger fell, his eyes jumped and he flew back quickly. Below Ironmonger was Stark Tower, and at the bottom was the giant arc reactor of Stark Tower. The silver steel giant was flashing red light, and it was obvious that Laser wanted to use his ability to leave the steel cage. But it was too late. Ironmonger smashed the reinforced glass on the top of the building, and landed on the giant arc reactor with a sound of steel collision. The next second, the arc reactor reacted violently, and terrifying energy surged out of it. Boom! With a sound of explosion, the glass that shook the building was shattered, and the brilliant energy wrapped in flames rushed out of the building, and even rushed out of the bottom directly from the top of the building to the sky. Looking at this scene, Tony immediately said, Jarvis, is there anyone in the building? No. Tony breathed a sigh of relief, and suddenly saw a blue track falling from the sky like a falling comet. Is that Wheeler? But what about the wings? Tony's eyes widened. Wheeler put the giant black wolf he was carrying on the roof, and the energy wings behind him turned into light and dissipated. He slowly walked towards Tony and said unexpectedly, have you finished the battle? Tony nodded and said with a wry smile, he ran out of energy and fell from here. Wheeler was stunned and chuckled. He did see the conspicuous column of fire, but he didn't know that was the reason. He thought it was Tony who knocked Ironmonger down. Where is the leader of the terrorists? Wheeler asked in a low voice. He wanted to find that guy, then get him to say something and let Murat see the reality. Tony pointed to the ground. He was the one who just fell down. Huh? Wheeler was very surprised. Has the plot changed? Weller suddenly realized, did he kill Obadiah? Yeah, Tony responded, feeling the pain in his body, and said with gritted teeth, I have to go back and rest. Weller nodded, and shook his head at the black giant wolf that was about to wake up not far away. If he couldn't break Murat's fantasy of promise to those terrorists, and this guy still went against him, he could only kill him. Let's go. Tony walked to Weller and asked curiously, what was the matter with the wings just now? Weller smiled and said, secret. Tony pondered for a moment. In exchange, how about I tell you what color underwear I am wearing now? Weller was silent for a moment, and said with a broken expression, you are crazy. Why should I know this kind of thing? Didn't you ask last time, me you? Damn it, I was just talking casually. You idiot mustache. Go to hell. Weller pointed at Tony and cursed. But he was so excited that he didn't see that the event point in the system was disappearing quickly, and on the reflection of the world tree, a reflection fruit fell from the tree. Snap. The fruit broke. A crisp sound rang in Weller's mind. Weller was stunned. What the hell? It's the damn event point. A fruit is ripe. What will happen? Weller felt a layer of haze in his heart. At this moment, a crisp sound of steel collision appeared in the building under his feet. Hearing the sound, Weller turned around and looked, and suddenly a huge figure with flames all over his body jumped out of the building and appeared in front of him. The man's body was like flowing magma, emitting a terrifying temperature. And even a cluster of flames came out from time to time. Pieces of steel fragments flowed quickly on his body, quickly covering his whole body, as if replacing his skin. It was Laser. Not only did he not die, but he also mutated. Weller and Tony looked at each other in surprise, but Weller unconsciously thought of the event fruit that had just broken. It must be related to the fruit. Weller cursed in his heart, and noticed that Raza's missing head was recovering quickly. The blue energy gathered at Weller's fingertips, and then flew out like a cannonball. No matter what the opponent is now, it is definitely right to kill him. But something that Weller didn't expect happened. The steel fragments on Raza's body suddenly peeled off his body and quickly combined into a flaming shield in front of him. Boom! With a bang, Raza blocked Weller's attack, and the wound on his head had healed, but it was constantly flashing red light, and the blood vessels and flames were clearly visible. How? Raza sneered at Weller and Tony. It's really hard to predict good and bad. Who would have thought that he would be reborn in the energy of the arc reactor when he was dying? At this moment, he saw Murat, who was thrown aside, and said unexpectedly, you didn't kill this waste? Because of the recovery of his injuries, Murat, who was exhausted, opened his eyes with difficulty. Raza gritted his teeth and said, if this bastard could kill you too, I wouldn't be in this state now. I would have left with my steel armor long ago. As he said that, he pointed his hand at Murat, and the steel fragments peeled off his hand and flew out like bullets with flames. Blue energy appeared from under Weller's feet, spreading on the ground like vines, forming a shield in front of Murat to protect him. Tony's palm lit up, and when he was about to shoot the palm cannon at Raza, Weller pressed Tony's arm and whispered, I have something to ask him. Tony was stunned for a moment, but the light in his palm still dimmed. Weller looked at Raza calmly and said, if you want to kill this bastard, then what about the agreement you made with this bastard? Agreement? What agreement? Raza asked in confusion, taking the time to familiarize himself with his new ability. Weller said slowly, the agreement to let mutants live equally in the area you rule. Hearing Weller's question, Murat's eyes were unusually bright, waiting for Raza's answer. Laser was stunned for a moment, then grinned and laughed sarcastically, haha, that idiot actually believed it. As soon as the words came out, the light in Murat's eyes flickered, and was blown away by the night wind. He struggled to stand up and rushed forward like a wild beast that had lost its mind. But get out of the way, Weller growled, his eyes turned blue, and when Murat passed by him, he kicked him and kicked him out. He spent so much effort, not to let that guy die. Weller's eyes flashed with blue light, and with his hands waving, energy pokers flew towards Laser. Tony also flew up, aimed his palm at Laser, and fired 2 palm cannons. Laser roared, and the steel fragments on his body turned red, like a rain of fire. PS, please read and vote. Chapter 31, Copycat Spirit Bomb. Boom, boom. Fierce explosions sounded one after another, and it seemed as if fireworks were blooming over the rooftop of Stark Industries. Passers-by looked at the rooftop curiously, and when they found out that someone was fighting, they kept exclaiming, while those who were curious had already taken out their phones to record and take pictures. A few seconds later, a golden red Iron Man was shot down from midair by a ball of fire mixed with steel fragments. Amid the exclamations, the golden red figure spurted out a large amount of flames from his hands and feet just before falling to the ground. After stabilizing his falling body, he turned into a beam of fire again and flew to the rooftop. Is it Iron Man? Iron Man is fighting, oh my god. How lucky. Cheers kept ringing, and more people gathered. At the same time, Tony, who had returned to the battlefield, watched Wheeler fighting with the enemy, and for a moment he couldn't find a chance to intervene. Shit, this bastard has become too difficult to deal with. Tony murmured as he looked at Laser. Laser's body of flaming steel fragments was really too difficult to deal with. The steel fragments were completely under his control, and when they stuck to his body, they increased that guy's defense. When they left his body, not only did they carry high temperatures, but they could also be combined into various weapons, and even shot out light bullets. What made him even more helpless was that Laser's recovery ability was too terrible. Wheeler left a hole in the bastard's body, and it recovered in just a few seconds. At this moment, Tony's eyes lit up. He noticed the scattered blue light on the ground and remembered the scene when Wheeler grabbed Murat. Without any hesitation, he whispered, "Jarvis, gather the energy in your chest." The next second, the energy net rose from the ground and shrank quickly, trapping Laser inside. Tony shouted in a low voice and shot a beam of light at Laser. At the same time, Wheeler snapped his fingers in coordination, and the energy net exploded instantly. Blue energy continued to explode, and bits of flames continued to fly out. But Wheeler still didn't stop, and his fingertips condensed into blue energy bombs, which flew towards Laser like cannonballs. Laser roared, and all the steel fragments on his body flashed red and flew out, spinning rapidly around him, surrounding him like a vortex of fire. At this time, his body was full of pits and cracks, and there was a big hole in his chest. But even so, he still didn't die, and his wounds were still recovering quickly. Tony tried to fire 2 palm cannons, but they were blocked by the vortex of fire, and the remaining energy was not enough for him to use more powerful attacks. Wheeler. What should I do? Tony landed beside Wheeler and said anxiously, "That bastard's body is recovering." "He needs time, doesn't he?" Wheeler said lightly. The blue light in his eyes became brighter, and he murmured, "I just need some time too." "What?" Tony looked at Wheeler in confusion, but saw a pair of blue energy wings appearing from behind Wheeler. "Let me show you a copycat version of the spirit bomb. Also, take Murat away." Wheeler smiled at Tony and flew over Laser's head. "What the hell is that?" Tony's eyes widened, and he saw a ball of energy appear on Wheeler's raised palm, and it grew bigger and bigger as time passed. Watching this scene, Tony swallowed his saliva. And the onlookers surrounding the Stark building also widened their eyes and kept shouting, "God! Wheeler is condensing energy. Very dangerous." Realizing this, Tony grabbed one of Murat's legs and flew up, quickly retreating backwards. Gradually, when the blue energy ball was almost as big as Wheeler, it finally stopped expanding. Looking at the firestorm below, Wheeler grinned. He had wanted to try this trick for a long time. After all, there were not many such opportunities. In the shocked eyes of everyone, the energy ball emitted a dazzling blue light and was thrown down by Wheeler like a small sun. The next second, the blue sun collided with a vortex of fire. Time seemed to stop for a moment. Boom! A thunderous explosion sounded on the roof of Stark building. "No!" Laser screamed in horror, being completely swallowed by the violent energy. Next, it was Stark building. 1 floor, 2 floors, 3 floors. A section of Stark building was cut off, and the crushed sand and gravel flew up like rain, and then fell down in an overwhelming manner. After a few seconds, the dust settled and the scene was silent. Where are Iron Man and that mysterious man? Suddenly, a question broke the silence. Everyone looked up and could only see a flash of fire that disappeared quickly. What is certain is that the battle that took place tonight is destined to make the headlines tomorrow. At this time, a flash of fire was flying slowly in the air. Tony held Wheeler in one hand and a huge black wolf in the other, which made Wheeler unconsciously sing the beautiful song "Go Back to My Mother's Home" in his mind. "I say, Wheeler, what was the name of that movie you just made?" Tony asked, and seeing Wheeler's tired look, he couldn't help laughing. Just after throwing your thing, Wheeler fell from mid-air due to exhaustion. If he hadn't caught it in time. Tisk tisk. Tony shook his head. "Didn't I tell you? A knockoff version of the spirit bomb," Wheeler said weakly. "Damn it, It was the first time I played with this kind of thing, and I didn't control the strength well. Theoretically, as long as Wheeler has enough control over the alien energy, his body and mind can withstand it, and he is given unlimited time, he can extract enough energy from the alien energy universe to blow up the entire Earth. Unfortunately, this is only in theory. Wheeler sighed in his mind. The spirit bomb, what a weird name, Tony complained, but heard Jarvis' reminder. Sir, you don't have enough energy, you'd better find a place to land first. Jarvis considerately posted several suitable landing locations. WTF. Tony cursed with a dark face, and found a deserted place to land. When Tony landed, the reactor just went dark. Wheeler sat up from the ground, his strength slowly recovering, and seeing Tony standing there like a can, he couldn't help laughing. Damn it, I must develop a combat suit that doesn't need the help of a robotic arm to wear as soon as possible, Tony muttered, took off the mask with difficulty, and let out a long breath. Wheeler, at this moment, Murat got up from the ground. Tony's face tightened. Don't worry, he has no ill intentions now, Wheeler said calmly, and said to Murat, did you see it clearly? Murat nodded, and instead of showing the disappointment that Wheeler expected, he saw hope in the other's eyes. When Wheeler was wondering, Murat suddenly said, it's decided, I will follow you in the future, Wheeler said speechlessly. What is your mentality to make this wonderful decision? Because, I see the future in you, Murat looked solemn and grinned at Wheeler. Tony exclaimed, oh my god, the big dog can smile too, Murat glanced over fiercely. Tony took off his mask with a click. P.S. Please read on and give me your monthly votes. Chapter 32 Wisdom. Wheeler said speechlessly, what kind of mentality did you have to make this stupid decision? Because, I see the future in you, Murat looked solemn and grinned at Wheeler. Tony exclaimed, oh my god, the big dog can also smile, Murat glanced at him fiercely. Tony took off his mask with a click. One person, a can of Tony's stuffing, and a black giant wolf. The three looked at each other. A gust of wind blew, and Wheeler finally said, don't follow me, no. I have already identified you, Murat was very stubborn. Do you believe I will kill you? I don't believe it, Murat smiled triumphantly. If Wheeler wanted to kill him, he would have been gone long ago. Tony muttered, what a big licking dog. Murat looked at Tony, and suddenly stretched out his claws and pushed Tony. Tony screamed and fell to the ground. Bang! A shallow pit was smashed on the ground. Looking at poor Tony, Wheeler couldn't help but chuckle. Tony opened his mask and asked curiously, Big Murat, why do you follow Wheeler so stubbornly? Because I see hope in the future, Murat said seriously again. Psycho, Wheeler cursed, closed his eyes and lay on the ground, no longer paying attention to Murat. Murat didn't mind, but happily shook his tail. He figured it out. It's better to put the hope and future of mutants on mutants, and Wheeler is his hope and the future of mutants. Murat's eyes flashed with wisdom. Why did Wheeler let him go and spend a lot of effort to wake him up from the terrorists' promises? That's because Wheeler wanted to do something for mutants, but he hadn't made up his mind yet, so Wheeler let him go, woke him up, and wanted him to do something for mutants. In this way, in Wheeler's view, it can be regarded as indirectly doing something for the mutants, and then getting a sense of satisfaction. What an awkward person. Murat came to a conclusion. But he believed that as long as Wheeler recognized his own ideas, he would definitely change the world. Thinking of this, Murat felt as comfortable as eating an ice cream in summer. He yawned and lay on the ground. An hour later, when Happy brought Pepper to find the three people, looking at Wheeler and the other two lying motionless on the ground, Happy's face turned pale and he screamed, oh my god, they were wiped out. Pepper's eyes jumped and glared at Happy. Don't talk nonsense, they are all alive and well. Pepper hurriedly got out of the car, and when she was about to wake up Tony opened his tired eyes and said faintly, Pepper, remember, deduct 1 month's salary from Happy. Puff. Pepper smiled and nodded. No, boss. Please do it for the sake of me coming to pick you up. Happy, with a sad face, walked quickly towards Tony, but when he passed by Murat, he couldn't help but look down at the black giant wolf with closed eyes. Was it killed? Happy curiously reached out and poked it. Murat suddenly opened his mouth and roared at Happy. Happy screamed and jumped back and forth like a grasshopper. Ha ha ha! Looking at this funny scene, Murat rolled on the ground happily. Pepper looked at Happy speechlessly, but Tony was hesitating whether to deduct another month's salary from Happy. It was really too embarrassing. Wheeler sat up tiredly, looked at Murat rolling on the ground, and said speechlessly, "Murat, you are a human, don't really think of yourself as a dog." Murat climbed up with a grunt, licked his big furry face, and said to Weller in a flattering way, "I am what you say I am, you are so shameless." Tony couldn't help but complain. Happy looked at this scene, his eyes thoughtful, as if he had learned something. Pepper took out the toolbox and opened the Iron Man suit under Tony's guidance. Tony couldn't wait to come out, feeling relieved. He looked down at the Iron Man suit on the ground, and a new transformation plan came into his mind. Because of Tony's special instructions, Pepper and Happy drove a pickup truck when they came. Everyone threw the Iron Man suit into the back compartment and got in. Weller glanced at Murat standing outside the car, frowned and said, "Remove your transformation and leave here first." Murat dug his claws on the ground and said shyly, "Laser took me to find the leader of the Ten Rings gang. They injected me with an experimental virus, which gave me new abilities, but it also conflicted with my original mutant abilities. If I remove the transformation now, my body will not be able to withstand the virus and explode." Sure enough, it was the extraneous virus. Weller's eyes flashed with realization. He said that he saw Laser's abilities and felt familiar. 10 rings, extraneous virus. If that's the case, then this 10 rings should be the fake one. Tony's eyes narrowed, and he said in a cold voice, "Do you know where the leader of the 10 rings is?" He mainly dealt with the terrorists of the 10 rings in the Middle East, but these terrorists were like weeds. When he killed a group, a new group would emerge. It was too easy to become a terrorist. But if the leader of the 10 rings could be caught, it would be a good thing for him and the world. "I don't know," Murat shook his head. "They just took me to a laboratory, and I didn't see the leader of the 10 rings. Where is that laboratory?" "Do you remember?" Murat recalled and nodded. "I know, but I'm not sure if that laboratory is still there." As he said that, he jumped onto the bed of the pickup truck, and his huge body made the car shake twice. After the car stabilized, he explained, "Those viruses are too unstable. Maybe the laboratory has been blown up by those who injected the virus." Tony groaned. "Go back and tell me the location. Although there may not be any gains, it is still worth a trip. The 10 rings are too dangerous. If they master the virus, it will be even more difficult to deal with them." "Happy, drive, go home." Tony patted the back of the chair. Happy responded, and the car started and drove away. At this moment, Wheeler suddenly said, "Tony, I have a suggestion. You can inform S.H.I.E.L.D. about what happened tonight." "That makes sense." Tony patted his forehead and thought of the beautiful female agent. Not to mention Obadiah's death, the battle on the Stark building was seen by too many people, and it would be troublesome for him to deal with it himself. It would be right to hand it over to S.H.I.E.L.D. After all, they are professionals in finishing off such troublesome things. "By the way, Wheeler, you destroyed my company's building. Don't you want to say something to me?" Tony looked at Wheeler sideways. Wheeler looked at Tony in confusion, his eyes clear but with a hint of stupidity. "What? How come I don't know? When did it happen?" "Shame on you, I'm just a college student. Do you believe I will sue you for defamation?" As the car drove away, Tony's trash talk gradually disappeared in the wind. P.S. Good morning, brothers. If you have encountered or seen it, hand over your ticket. Chapter 33 Campus Idol. The next day. Needless to say, Iron Man's appearance in Stark Tower and his battle with the mysterious man became the headlines of the next day's news. Related reports were overwhelming, and a news carnival swept across the entire country of M, and the heat could not be suppressed. In addition, the battle between Iron Man and Ironmonger and the battle on the roof of Stark Tower, these two battle videos were like unstoppable viruses, spreading rapidly on the internet. Iron Man has been confirmed to be a participant in these two battles, so people want to know more about who fought side by side with Iron Man and threw down the blue sun. After all, the scene of the blue sun falling and destroying the 3 or 4-story building was really shocking. As for the Battle of Stark Tower, in addition to a large number of people who eat melons, there are also many decryption and reasoning parties. The battle took place in the Stark Industrial Building, so many people suspected that Iron Man was related to Stark Corporation, and hoped that Stark Corporation would make a positive response to Iron Man's identity and the destroyed Stark building. In response to this, Stark Company lived up to expectations and held a press conference early the next morning, and it was live broadcasted throughout. For a moment, reporters rushed to the press conference site like sharks smelling blood. At the same time, at the Los Angeles airport, on Tony's luxury plane, Wheeler was holding his mobile phone and watching the live broadcast of the press conference. Murat squatted beside Wheeler, tilting his head and staring at Wheeler's mobile phone. Last night, after Tony notified S.H.I.E.L.D. immediately took action. In just one night, Obadiah's incident was disguised as an accidental death and handled cleanly. As for the two battles and the identity of Iron Man, S.H.I.E.L.D. also gave a solution. So, what will Tony choose? Wheeler was a little curious. The camera in the mobile phone turned from the reporters on the scene to the podium. On the podium, Rhodes, who was sent to supervise Tony, looked at the reporters on the scene expressionlessly. After Tony walked to the podium, he gave Tony a hug and winked at him implicitly. Tony nodded and stood in front of the podium. Wheeler was shocked. A moment later, when Wheeler saw Tony crumpling up the manuscript given to him by S.H.I.E.L.D. and stuffing it into Rhodes' hands, a smile appeared on his face unconsciously. In Murat's surprised expression, he almost spoke at the same time as Tony. In fact, "I am Iron Man." After saying that, Wheeler looked at the press conference that had been completely detonated, smiled faintly, and turned off his phone. "How do you know he will admit that he is Iron Man?" Murat asked in surprise in a low voice. "Because he is Tony Stark," Wheeler said faintly, and the smile on his face could no longer be restrained. "Stark's stock is going to rise, and he is going to get rich." At this moment, a beautiful woman came over, looked at Murat lying beside Wheeler with fear, and smiled reluctantly. "Sir, the plane is ready to take off." Originally, she was still wondering who is qualified to sit on Tony Stark's private plane, and was still wondering if there was a chance to have a deep exchange, but now forget it. Wheeler nodded, and after the woman left, she looked out the window. Speaking of which, as a student of X school, he has spent less time in school than outside. "I hope that after returning this time, I can have a peaceful period of time." However, what surprised Wheeler was that after such a long time, those shadows did not attack him. Even when he and Tony were exposed in the news at the last bloody dance, those shadows did not appear. Did he give up temporarily? In addition, after such a long time, I don't know if Logan's hard work has paid off. Thinking of this, Wheeler couldn't help laughing. After a while, the plane took off, and Wheeler yawned and fell asleep. X school. Just like outside the school, the battle video of Stark building was also circulated crazily in the school. Almost everyone had a copy in just one class. But unlike the outside world who were discussing that Iron Man was Tony Stark, they were talking about Wheeler who fought side by side with Iron Man. Yes, it was Wheeler. Although the video circulating on the internet was not clear, and Wheeler's face was blurred and mosaic-like, a mutant child was able to zoom in the video clearly. So when the children in the school saw Wheeler's face clearly, they immediately became excited. This was someone from their school, and like them, he was a student of the school. Recognition, pride, and admiration. For the first time, they felt that superheroes were so close to them, and even felt that they could become superheroes themselves, and wanted to use their mutant abilities to fight the enemy. For a time, Wheeler became the idol of the whole people in the X school. Ororo and Logan walked towards Professor X's office, but all they heard along the way was talking about Wheeler. This guy, is really popular now," Ororo sighed, even a little jealous. They, the teachers, worked hard, but they were not as popular as a student who had just come to the school and had not even been there for a few days. Haha, Logan grinned happily and said, "They are all students, so it must be easier for them to find common ground and resonate with each other." After a pause, Logan winked at Ororo. "I'm right." Ororo chuckled, "The more popular Wheeler is, the better. After all, he is Professor X's key research target." "What research target?" Logan pricked up his ears. Ororo smiled. "Want to know?" Logan nodded quickly. Ororo's smile faded and she snorted softly. "Go ask the professor." Logan smiled awkwardly. 3 days ago, he tried to hook up with Jean Grey on a whim, but was caught by Ororo. As a result, he lost more than he gained. He didn't hook up with Jean Grey, and Ororo didn't give him a good face for 3 days, so he was touched. It seems that their relationship as bedmates will end here. Soon, the two came to Professor X's office. In the office, there were 3 people besides Professor X: Hank the Beast, Jean Grey, and a man Logan had never seen. The man wore dark red glasses and stood closely with Jean Grey. Seeing the 2 people coming in, Professor X said with a smile, "Logan, let me introduce you, this is Scott, he was on a mission before and just came back." "Hello, Logan, welcome to X School," Scott greeted Logan. Looking at Scott and Jean's hands linked together, Logan hummed softly. Scott is Jean's boyfriend, Ororo said in a low voice, looking at Logan with a warning, and then her voice was as light as a feather brushing against Logan's ears, and she said in his ear, "Don't mess with Jean again." She didn't want to see Logan and Scott fighting, which would cause a lot of impact and damage to the school. Logan nodded. Professor X knocked on the table quietly. "Okay, stop whispering, let's talk about business now." Chapter 34 Shadow Trail. Let's talk business? Professor X's voice was unusually serious, and everyone's expression was startled. Professor X's eyes swept over everyone and slowly said, "There are clues about the shadows that have repeatedly attacked the school." Scott, Ororo smiled and said, "I knew you would bring good news." Scott's face flashed with embarrassment. "Well, I found limited clues about those shadows." Logan was surprised and said, "Is it possible that nothing was found?" Jean Grey explained, "Scott's mission is to rescue the children who were captured for experiments. During this time, he rescued dozens of children. Finding those shadows is not Scott's main mission." "Oh?" Logan stretched out his voice and looked at Scott provocatively. Scott had no expression on his face, but he clenched his fist. The two people who had never met before had a strong smell of gunpowder from the first sight of meeting. There was no special reason, and it had nothing to do with Jean Grey. If you want to make an analogy, the two of them are like a dog meeting a cat. Ororo gently bumped Logan's arm and whispered, "Don't make trouble." Logan shrugged and said nothing. Professor X looked at the few people. His expression was still gentle, but he sighed quietly in his heart. Hank pushed his glasses. "Charles, what is the origin of those shadows?" Professor X pondered for a moment and said, "According to the information given by S.H.I.E.L.D., those shadows are related to a military figure who hates mutants. You also know this person, Hank." "Military?" Ororo frowned. "If the actions of those shadows were instructed by the military, it would be very troublesome to deal with." Hank looked at Professor X thoughtfully and guessed, "Could this person be Stryker?" Professor X nodded solemnly. Hank's face changed for a while, and he said faintly, "Is he still unable to let go of Jason's matter?" Professor X sighed. "Jason, we neglected it. We did not discover Jason's psychological problems in time." Jason, hearing this name, Ororo, Jean Grey, and Scott all looked very ugly. They were all deceived by Jason's ability, and they all knew how terrible Jason's ability was. "Wait," Logan looked at them in confusion, and said speechlessly, "Can you explain it more clearly? Who is Jason? Who is Stryker?" When Logan said this name, some fragmented memories flashed through his mind. During this time in school, after Professor X's guidance, he remembered a lot of things. He always felt that he had heard this name somewhere, and even when he heard it at this time, he couldn't help but feel a strong hatred in his heart. Logan pressed his head, and some memories slowly emerged, and his expression gradually lost control. "Logan," Professor X shouted in a low voice, and the power of the mind entered Logan's mind, calming Logan's emotions and calming the rolling sea of memories. Compared with ordinary people, Logan's experience is too rich. If the memories and emotions of nearly 200 years burst out in a very short period of time, it would be like a river bursting its banks, which would cause great harm to Logan. Therefore, when Professor X began to treat Logan, he carefully guided Logan, allowing Logan to recover his memory at a slow speed without being hurt. Logan took a deep breath and nodded to Professor X. "I'm fine." Professor X withdrew his mental power and continued the previous topic, explaining, "Jason was once a student of the X school, and Stryker is his father. Jason has a mental illness. His ability is to create illusions, and he is called the Master of Illusions. He stayed in the school for a while, and after returning home, he created illusions every day to hurt his parents, which eventually led to his mother, Stryker's wife, unable to bear it and drilled through her head with an electric drill." At this point, Professor X's expression was heavy. Hank patted Professor X's shoulder gently and comforted him. "It's not your fault. Jason's illusion ability is too tricky. It can even deceive your telepathy." Jason is known as the Master of Illusion. He can create convincing psionic vision, hearing, touch, smell, and taste illusions, allowing people around him to see, hear, touch, smell, or taste things that do not actually exist. Even Professor X is not immune. Logan frowned and said, "So, because of Jason's incident, Stryker hates mutants." "It's not just this reason," Ororo said in a deep voice. "Jason's incident is just a catalyst. Stryker himself has no good feelings towards mutants. There are even rumors that he has been secretly studying mutants and conducting illegal human experiments, Jean Grey said with an unpleasant face. If those shadows are really related to him, those rumors may be true. At this time, Scott added, there are also military shadows and some experimental bases during this mission. Swish, Logan whistled. What are you waiting for? Just hearing the name of Stryker, Logan had the urge to cut him into pieces. Moreover, Stryker was related to those shadows, and even attacked him and Wheeler several times in a row. His adamantium claws were already hungry. Scott frowned and said, we need to make a detailed plan for this operation. After all, it involves the military. Professor X nodded and said, yes, so you should focus on collecting evidence first, Ororo said in a deep voice. What is our first target? SHIELD has provided some suspicious bases. We can start the investigation from these places. As he said that, Professor X took a piece of document out of the drawer of his desk and placed it on the table. Hank glanced at it and snorted softly. SHIELD, don't let in some targets they need to eliminate. Given Nick Fury's personality, this is very likely. Professor X pressed his aching temple and said solemnly, so, you must be careful. Ororo spoke first. Professor, I'll go this time. Professor X thought about it and made arrangements. Okay, you lead the team this time. Jean and Logan will go together. Ororo is responsible, calm, and not as extreme as Scott. He is a very good candidate for captain, and Jean's telepathic ability is very advantageous in investigating evidence. As for Logan, Professor X remembered some of Logan's memories that he saw with his ability. Logan should be related to Stryker, which may be helpful for this investigation. Let's change Wheeler. He has a relationship with these shadows, and it's best for him to investigate these shadows. Logan made his own suggestion, but looked at Ororo and Jean Grey carefully. He was definitely not afraid of these two people, absolutely not. Professor X smiled and shook his head. Wheeler is still just a student and has just returned from a mission. Let him have a rest first, and we can talk about it later when you have made progress. P.S. Please read on and give me your monthly votes. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 Encountering an Angel. On Tony's luxury plane, Wheeler closed his eyes and checked the system. The world tree was still lush and leafy, standing quietly in his mind, as if it would never be affected by anything. At this time, there were 3 silver and 6 bronze fruits hanging on the world tree, a total of 9 fruits, which looked very pleasing. It's a pity that no higher-level fruits were brushed out, Wheeler murmured in his heart and looked at his world points. Current world points. 740. World point growth rate. 145 days. World point source. 18. Unknowingly, the number of relationships established has reached 18. If I try hard this time, I may be able to brush the relationships of a few little cuties to the next stage. At that time, the world points will increase rapidly. Wheeler laughed and was in a very happy mood. What made him even happier was that the event point source was reset to 0 again. Current event points. 710. Event point source. 0. After Obadiah was killed, the event point source was reset to 0, and the event points finally stopped increasing. In addition, one thing that Wheeler could be sure of was that Laser fell into the arc reactor and his ability mutated. This was definitely not an accident, and it was even less likely that Laser was just lucky. At that time, 200 event points disappeared, an event point fruit matured and fell, and then Laser mutated. This event point was indeed not a good thing. Wheeler muttered, and suddenly the sweet broadcast sounded in the plane. Dear Mr. Bryan, the plane will start landing in 5 minutes, please pay attention to safety. Hearing the reminder, Wheeler opened his eyes and kicked Murat, who was lying on the ground. Wake up. Murat slowly opened his eyes, stretched his huge body and yawned. So soon? Last night, he fought with Wheeler but was crippled. Not only did he break 3 legs, but his body was also covered with wounds. In order to recover from these injuries, he exhausted his physical strength, and now he has not fully recovered. Looking at the black giant wolf that Murat transformed into, Wheeler suddenly sighed. Why is he always associated with wolves? Are you really going to school with me? Wheeler couldn't help asking. Of course, I'll go wherever you go. Murat was still very determined. Weller looked at Murat with a strange look in his eyes, and couldn't help saying, "What can you do in school like this?" Murat said shamelessly, "I don't care, I'm not going to be a gatekeeper when I grow up. Good guy, a former terrorist goes to guard the school, and those who don't know would think it's a horror school." Weller complained in his heart, and after feeling the plane start to descend, he looked at Murat and murmured, "I hope I won't cause any trouble when I go to school. It would be best if a way could be found to solve Murat's transformation problem. A black giant wolf following him is really too conspicuous." However, Weller glanced at Murat, his eyes flashing with a glimmer that made Murat's body cold. This guy, it seems that he can ride after transformation. Riding a cool black giant wolf doesn't seem to be unacceptable. But things didn't go as planned. Before Weller became a wolf knight, he had to be a wolf dragger first. The black giant wolf that Murat turned into was too conspicuous. In order not to cause a commotion, he could only use his newly developed flying ability to take Murat back to school. When they arrived at an inconspicuous place, amid Murat's protests, Weller used energy to weave a huge net to put him in, and then flapped a pair of gorgeous blue wings and flew towards the school. The blue wings made continuous bursting sounds while flapping, and Weller's speed was getting faster and faster. Suddenly, a white shadow flashed by not far from him. Huh? Weller was stunned for a moment, and couldn't help but stop in place. The mask formed by blue energy turned into a light spot and disappeared. "Why, what happened?" Murat, whose mouth and eyes were crooked by the strong wind, asked with difficulty after retracting his tongue. Weller hesitated and said, "I seem to see an angel." "Angel?" Murat asked in confusion. "Are you talking about yourself?" Weller frowned and recalled the moment just now. "No, his wings are white. Are you talking about the one behind you?" Murat reminded. Weller looked back and saw a young man looking at him curiously, looking at the blue wings flapping behind him. The man was shirtless, with tight and powerful muscles, a pair of white wings fluttering gently behind him, and three-dimensional facial features under his short blonde hair. But surprisingly, this man who was as bright as the sun had a pair of dark eyes, revealing a strong sense of inferiority and melancholy. Weller raised his eyebrows and remembered the other party's identity. A mutant, an angel. "I'm Warren," the angel greeted Weller. Weller smiled and said, "Weller." Weller was a little happy when he heard the prompt sound of the system establishing a relationship. Who would have thought that transporting an express could also establish a new relationship? Warren looked at Weller, and after seeing Murat, he asked in surprise and caution, "Where are you going? Do you need help?" "Back to school." "School?" Warren looked at the wings behind Weller, stretched out his hand to gesture, and asked in confusion, "Are you going back to school like this?" "Yes." Weller nodded, and seeing Warren's expression was even more confused, he suddenly said, "X-school, a school for mutants." "Mutant school? There is such a school?" Warren was stunned. Ever since he awakened his ability and grew the pair of wings on his back, he was very scared, and even endured the pain and tried to cut off the wings. After his father discovered his wings, he strictly forbade him to go out, let alone show his wings to others. Disgusted, afraid, and painful, when he accidentally saw his father looking at him with these eyes, he became inferior and depressed. Even for so many years, he had never left the house, and his growth and education were all carried out in that cage-like home. But God gave him a pair of wings, and he couldn't resist the desire to fly. After quarreling with his father, he flew out of the cage in a rage, but he didn't expect to meet Weller, who was also flying in the sky. "Yes, do you want to go and see it together?" Weller smiled and invited. Warren hesitated a little. After the almost venting flight, he had regained his composure. Because he had not met strangers for many years, he was a little timid and at a loss when he heard Weller's invitation. Ding ding ding. Suddenly, his cell phone rang. Warren breathed a sigh of relief, took out his cell phone and said to Weller, "Well, next time." He needed to be mentally prepared. It was not easy for him to take this step. Weller nodded, "Goodbye, I hope to see you in school in the future." He had already seen clearly that Warren was a socially anxious child. "Well, goodbye," Warren said politely, flapped his wings and left quickly. "Weller. Go. It's uncomfortable for me to hang in the air," Murat shouted to Weller. Weller's face darkened, and he suddenly had the urge to throw this guy down. P.S. Brothers, come and get some votes. Chapter 36, Emotional Heat. Weller landed with Murat not far from the school. The moment the energy net disappeared, Murat couldn't wait to stand up from the ground and stretched. He was so depressed in the net. Is that the school you mentioned? Murat was amazed when he looked at the castle not far away. The gray-white castle reminded him of the stories he had heard when he was a child and the magic castle in his dreams. Let's go. Weller grinned and pinched his sore arms. If it weren't for his stronger energy control and super body state, he might not be able to fly so far with Murat. Murat glanced at Weller. You should exercise more. Weller looked at Murat with a dangerous light flashing in his eyes. How dare you say that? Murat stepped back and then shouted, I'll go ahead and explore the way. When Weller walked to the school gate, Murat was trying to smile and prove his harmlessness to the school security guard who was guarding the gate. But the security guard with rabbit ears was trembling all over and almost stuck himself to the wall. Oh my god. He is just a mutant with rabbit ears, not a real rabbit. Although he can jump higher, run faster, and his eyes turn red when he uses his abilities, he is really not a rabbit. Paw. Wheeler slapped Murat's face aside and said with disgust, You are grinning? It would be strange if Albert was not scared by this grimacing look. Seeing Wheeler, Albert breathed a sigh of relief. He had seen Wheeler several times and knew that he was a student of the school. In addition, due to the battle in Stark Tower, Wheeler's name was spreading like wildfire in the school. Not only did the students like Wheeler, but he was also very envious of Wheeler. Wheeler, you're back, Albert greeted him. His rabbit ears moved slightly twice, his eyes fell on Murat, and he said carefully, Who is he? Before Wheeler could answer, Murat turned his head suddenly and introduced loudly, Murat Egan, Wheeler's loyal follower. Albert was stunned. Is he also a mutant? Wheeler nodded. For some reasons, he can only maintain this form temporarily. Wheeler pointed to the door. Sorry for the trouble. Oh, I'll open the door right away. Albert nodded and opened the door. Wheeler led Murat into the school gate, and after walking for another 2 minutes, they finally arrived in front of the school's castle building. Wheeler attracted a lot of attention along the way, and even many children followed Wheeler, like crazy fans chasing after a star. In this state, even the eye-catching Murat did not get much attention. Wheeler could feel the strong emotions contained in those eyes. Although he was a little surprised, his face remained calm. Wheeler. You're back. As the familiar voice sounded, Lee Kyan-hoon trotted over and gave Wheeler a hug. Lee Kyan-hoon winked at Wheeler and whispered, Because of those 2 battles, you are now a superstar in the school. Wheeler nodded and saw several familiar figures walking towards him. Iceman Bobby, Steelman Peter, Phantom Cat Katie, and the fanatical fireman John. Wait, there's something wrong with Fireman's current state. Wheeler's eyes jumped, but then he was startled by a series of system prompts. Relationship points plus 30. Relationship points plus 50. Relationship points. As a series of relationship points increased, Lee Kyan-hoon and others who had already established relationships broke through to the next stage. Suddenly, Wheeler's face bloomed with an extremely happy smile. Bobby's eyes were full of admiration. Wheeler, you are so amazing. Awesome. Steelman Peter, who always seemed a little dull, showed Wheeler a stiff smile. So cool. Wheeler, Phantom Cat screamed, imitating Wheeler's action of throwing the energy ball, with an excited expression. As the few people spoke, the students surrounding Wheeler exclaimed and cheered, and some even whistled excitedly. Feeling the kindness and admiration of these children, Wheeler was deeply moved and responded to everyone with a smile. These children are still good. The way they express their feelings is simple and passionate. Suddenly, an excited cry passed through the crowd. Wheeler looked over and his eyes twitched wildly. I saw the fireman John running towards him with an excited face, holding a poster of Wheeler holding an energy ball in his hand. He came to him and shouted loudly, You are my god. Wheeler's toes were on the ground, and his expression management system was a little out of control. This emotion doesn't have to be so passionate. John's face was flushed with excitement. At this moment, he was a loyal fan of Wheeler. Wheeler's strong posture, powerful fighting power, and free and easy style in battle are simply his dream. A strong man should be like Wheeler. What are you all doing here? Suddenly, a serious and majestic voice sounded in front of the castle. The chaotic scene quieted down, and Wheeler turned his head to look. He saw a slender man wearing dark red glasses standing at the gate of the castle, looking at the noisy students expressionlessly. Is this Cyclops, Scott? Scott said coldly. Everyone disperse. Class is about to start. As he said that, he looked at Wheeler. Come with me. The professor wants to see you. Wheeler nodded and whispered to Bobby and the others. Let's talk later. Bobby and the others nodded. Wheeler took Murat and followed Scott into the castle and walked towards Professor X's office. Scott, who had been expressionless just a second after entering the castle, patted Wheeler's shoulder with a smile. "Wheeler? I'm Scott, nice to meet you." Scott admired Wheeler's fighting style. Listening to the prompt sound of the system relationship being established, Wheeler smiled happily. Today is really his lucky day. After chatting with Scott, Wheeler took Murat to Professor X's office. Professor X was still gentle. When Wheeler and the other two came in, he nodded to Wheeler, then his eyes fell on Murat and he said softly, "You must be Murat. Wheeler has already told me about you. Welcome to join the school." Murat was a little surprised. "Since you have heard about me, you should know that I was a terrorist before. Aren't you afraid? This is a school." He felt that Professor X, as the administrator of the school, was a little too casual with strangers. The expression on Professor X's face became gentler, and he said in Murat's mind with his mind power, "Don't worry, I rarely misjudge people. This is a mind-related ability." Murat was stunned for a moment, then nodded. "In this case, there is no problem." Professor X looked at Wheeler kindly. "Wheeler, the mission reward has been transferred to you." Wheeler was moved and said, "Professor, how can I live without you?" Slippery. Professor X nodded Wheeler with a smile. "Go, take Murat to familiarize himself with the environment, and then have a good rest." "Professor, I think we should check Murat's body first." Chapter 37. A glance that requires a lifetime of healing. X School, in a special medical room in the basement. Murat was lying on the school's special mutant scanning instrument, and he was looking forward to his transformation back to human form. Hank was operating the instrument, and from time to time he was amazed at Murat's body structure after the transformation. Suddenly, he seemed to see something. His face froze, he pushed his glasses, shook his head and sighed. "What's wrong? Is there something wrong?" Wheeler asked with a frown, and Murat looked at Hank nervously. Since he was injected with a virus and his abilities mutated, he has never been examined so carefully. Hank glanced at a part of Murat's lower body, with a sad face, and said to Wheeler and the other two, "It's too much? Don't you think it's too much?" Wheeler and the other two followed Hank's gaze, and their faces became very ugly, and they nodded in unison. "It's really too much?" Murat was confused, but he felt a little cold. Professor X pressed his forehead, and said to Hank with rare impatience, "Scan it quickly." "Damn it. Why did you point it out?" He hadn't noticed it before, and now he was afraid of having a nightmare. Hank muttered, "You can't let me be the only one blind." Scott's eyes twitched, and he was obviously in a bad mood, but he was a little relieved in his heart. Fortunately, Jean went out to do the task, and Hank was in charge of the inspection this time. Hank turned off the instrument and said to Murat, "Let's go, we need to do other inspections." "We won't go," Wheeler and the other two said in unison. Hank left with a confused Murat, and Wheeler and the other two breathed a sigh of relief. It was just a short glance, and they felt that they would need a lifetime to heal. "By the way, why didn't you see Logan and the others?" Wheeler found a topic. Scott took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes vigorously. "They went to carry out a mission." "Mission?" Wheeler asked curiously. "What mission requires them to go together?" Professor X said slowly. "They went to investigate those shadows." "Shadows?" Wheeler was shocked. "Any news about these shadows?" "Why don't you wait for me to come back and go together?" "Wheeler, you need to rest." Professor X looked at Wheeler gently and explained, "Don't worry, they are just going to investigate. If they find anything, they will inform the school in time." After a pause, seeing that Wheeler's expression was calm, he continued, "According to the intelligence of SHIELD, those shadows are related to the military. Do you remember anything?" "No," Wheeler answered very straightforwardly. "What a joke. His soul has been replaced, how can he remember anything?" Professor X was not surprised at Wheeler's answer. "By the way, Professor," Wheeler suddenly remembered something and said solemnly, "Last time, Jean and I met Magneto in Los Angeles." "Why did he appear there?" "Magneto?" A flash of memory flashed across Professor X's eyes, and then he said, "In addition to being Magneto, he is also a father. He went to see his daughter." "Daughter?" Wheeler was a little surprised, and then asked curiously, "Who is his daughter?" "In this world, are the twins Magneto's children or refugees from Sokovia?" Professor X smiled and shook his head. "Sorry, I can't say that." Wheeler curled his lips, and the medical room became quiet. Half an hour later, Hank reappeared in front of Wheeler and the other two with Murat. "Do you know the reason?" Wheeler asked first. "Although Murat's transformed form is very cool, it is too inconvenient, especially the look just now." "Hank, You must find the reason, Professor X said sternly. If he can't find the reason and the way to cancel the transformation, for the physical and mental health of the children, he will kick this guy out of school. What? He just welcomed the other party? He's old, he can't remember. Hank was choked, pointed to the screen in the medical room, and said, let's take a look at the test results first. As he said that, he played the test results one by one, and explained, his body will be enhanced in all aspects after the transformation, which is why he can barely suppress the side effects of the virus. Through his blood test, I found that the virus that Wheeler mentioned has completed a certain degree of integration with his body. There are two ways to transform at will, either fully adapt to the virus and perfectly integrate with it, or find a way to eliminate the side effect of the virus that will make people explode. Hearing this, Wheeler raised his eyebrows and made a brief summary. It's useless for the time being, get out. Professor X and Scott nodded in agreement. Murat, what's the situation? How come you all changed just after a test? Stop it. Hank looked at the three people speechlessly, put on the glasses he had just taken off when he went to check, and said, there is another way. If we can help him temporarily suppress the virus in his body, he can temporarily return to human form. Murat asked hurriedly, how to suppress it? Hank pondered and said, weaken the virus, or strengthen the body, but there is a problem. What's the problem? Murat just breathed a sigh of relief, and his heart was lifted again. No matter which option you choose, after injecting the relevant drugs, your body may undergo new changes beyond your plan, Murat said speechlessly. So, you've been mumbling for a long time, which is equivalent to saying nothing. I have given a solution, but you just need to make your own decision, whether to try to let me develop the relevant drugs. Hank looked at Murat with a smile, as if he saw a good experimental product. Murat shuddered. At this moment, Weller's eyes flickered and said, if it is to strengthen his body, I might try it now. Really? Murat looked at Weller in surprise. I can only say try, because I haven't used it on anyone else. With that, Wheeler walked to Murat and put his hand on Murat's forehead. He wanted to inject the alien energy into Murat's body, so that Murat could reach the super body state and thus strengthen Murat's body. Before he gained control of his own energy, intermediate, he had thought about using the alien energy to strengthen others, but because of his lack of control, he never thought of trying it. Weller, are you sure? Professor X asked. Don't worry, you won't die. The next second, Wheeler's eyes turned blue, and he carefully controlled the alien energy to enter Murat's body. As time passed, Murat's eyes gradually turned blue. Wheeler's eyes flashed with fatigue, and he said to Murat, try it. This is dozens of times more difficult than him entering the super body state at will. Murat nodded, and his body began to shrink with a series of crisp sounds. After a few seconds, a middle-aged man appeared in front of everyone. Murat looked at his hand in surprise. God! It's finally recovered. Wheeler and the other three looked at Murat with relieved smiles. Finally, there was no more pressure. Chapter 38 Repair. Hank took out a white coat and threw it to Murat. How does it feel? Hank's eyes flashed with inquiry. He didn't expect that Wheeler's ability could be used in this way. Wheeler's ways of using his ability are really increasing. Murat put on the white coat casually and frowned. It feels good, but I can feel that my body's strength is slowly decreasing with the loss of energy. If it drops to a certain level, I must transform, otherwise there will be a risk of self-destruction. Wheeler raised his eyebrows. Of course, energy will be consumed. If you fight, the energy will flow faster, so don't fight if it's not necessary. Unlike him who can replenish the energy of the other dimension at any time, Murat's super body state is given by him. Murat felt it and said, if you just maintain this state, it can probably last for about 2 days. That is to say, Wheeler needs to use his ability to strengthen your body every 2 days. Hank made a summary. Professor X nodded. Not bad. At this time, Scott looked at Murat and said, since you choose to stay in school, what are you good at? Everyone should find their own place in X school. Good at, Murat pinched his chin and said thoughtfully, assisting in planning attacks, making bombs, terrorist threats. Say something normal. Professor X looked at Murat unhappily. He promised that if Murat brought these things to his students, he would make Murat really think that he was a wolf and send him to the zoo. Murat shuddered and immediately said, I am proficient in piano, violin, and other instruments. Seeing the 4 people looking at him strangely, they asked puzzledly, what's wrong? Is there something wrong? It's not wrong, it's completely unreasonable. Weller looked at Murat with a new understanding. Murat was tall and strong, with a pair of sharp eyes under his neat short hair, but the wrinkles on his face when he smiled made him look a lot friendlier. With his masculine and tough facial features and neatly trimmed beard, he really looked like a sunny teacher. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Murat felt a little uncomfortable. Professor X nodded with satisfaction and said to Wheeler, "Not bad this time. We found someone who is useful to the school." Hank grinned and said, "You mean Logan?" "Hey. No. Don't talk nonsense." Professor X's face twitched. "Logan is here, and the children are much more obedient." As he said that, he turned his wheelchair with his back to Wheeler, and his shoulders shook suspiciously. "Wheeler, come on. Try to find some useful people or things next time." "Murat," Scott nodded to Wheeler, "I'll leave him to you. As for the dormitory, there is an empty room over there." As soon as he finished speaking, he pushed Professor X out. Hank pushed his glasses and said to Wheeler, "Have a good rest for a day, and classes will start tomorrow." Wheeler asked expectantly, "Will there be Chinese classes tomorrow?" Hank nodded reluctantly and quickened his pace to leave the medical room. Wheeler glanced at Murat, pressed his forehead with a headache, and said, "Wait for me for a while, I'll find you some clothes." An hour later, Wheeler took the neatly dressed Murat around the school and let him know the general situation of the school. At Murat's request, Wheeler reluctantly arranged his room next to his own, and finally returned to his room. Wheeler lay on the boat, feeling extremely relaxed, thinking of the system prompt sound when he met Scott. Wheeler's mind moved and entered the system space. The number of established relationships has exceeded 20. Wheeler was shocked and quickly looked at the world tree. Sure enough, as the number of established relationships reached a certain number, several more fruits appeared on the world tree, and one of them even emitted an attractive golden light. 8 fruits were awarded this time. Wheeler clicked on the number of fruits, his expression somewhat surprised. When the number of relationships reached 5, 2 were awarded. When it reached 10, 4 were awarded. Now it has reached 20, 8 were awarded. Double growth? But if you want to get free fruits again, I'm afraid you have to wait until the number of relationships reaches 30. In this way, there will be 8 fruits refreshed every month. Wheeler was delighted. The more fruits he had, the more chances he had of getting high-quality fruits. Even if he couldn't refresh high-quality fruits, he could use enough low-level fruits to cultivate. And his next goal was to get a golden fruit. Thinking of this, Wheeler looked at the golden fruits on the tree, and his eyes flashed with anticipation. Finally, he looked at the lines of words next to the world tree. Current world points: 455. World point growth rate: 195/day. World point sources: 20. Current world fruits: 17, 1 gold, 6 silver, 10 bronze. Current event points: 710. Event point sources: 0. Can I get 195 world points every day now? Wheeler looked at the number in surprise. This time when he returned to school, most of the relationships he had established in School X broke through to the next stage almost at the same time, allowing the world point growth rate to reach a new height. Sure enough, the school was his blessed place, and those classmates were so enthusiastic. Wheeler sighed. What does 195 a day mean? It means that a bronze-level fruit can be ripened in 6 days. Wheeler was very excited, but when he thought that it would take 15,000 world points to ripen a golden fruit, he immediately calmed down. It's still a long way to go. At this time, ding-ding, Wheeler's mobile phone suddenly rang. After looking at the phone, Wheeler picked up the call and said lazily, "Miss Lee." "What's the matter?" "Hey," Lee Kyan-hoon laughed. "Do you want to go out?" "Go out. I just got back to school." Wheeler was a little lazy and didn't want to move. Lee Kyan-hoon cleared his throat. "Well, what? Authentic Chinese food. Do you want to go eat together? Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "Where are you?" "I'll be there soon." Wheeler immediately got up from the bed and walked out with a phone in hand. On the other side, after hearing Wheeler's words, Lee Kyan-hoon hung up the phone and smiled triumphantly to Bobby and Katie beside him. "Done." Katie winked at Lee Kyan-hoon and teased, "You don't like Wheeler, do you? He is very popular in school now." "Hurry up, don't be kidding." Lee Kyan-hoon threw a piece of chewing gum into his mouth and said firmly, "It's impossible for the two of us." Bobby asked curiously, "Why?" "I don't feel it," Lee Kyan-hoon said with a smile, and explained, "We are just buddies. This relationship is much more reliable than any love." Katie smiled and said, "If so, I will do it." "Do it?" Tisk tisk. Lee Kyan-hoon shook her head at Katie. "Based on my observation of him, He doesn't like to be a. Katie's face froze, and she grabbed Lee Kyan-hoon in shame and anger, and said, "You are the one who is a." Bobby on the side coughed lightly, turned his head to the side, and suddenly said, "Wheeler is here. P.S. The weather is good today, suitable for voting." Chapter 39 Familiar Taste. Wheeler walked towards the school gate, and when he saw Lee Kyan-hoon and the other two standing next to a red convertible sports car, he pinched his stiff chin. Along the way, almost everyone would greet him with a smile, and Wheeler's face was frozen with smiles. "Wheeler. Here." Bobby waved to Wheeler. Wheeler responded and walked over quickly. When he saw Lee Kyan-hoon, he whistled slightly. Lee Kyan-hoon was wearing denim hot pants, and the white t-shirt on the upper body was tied at the waist, showing off her curvy figure. Lee Kyan-hoon raised her eyebrows and said to Wheeler, "Don't you want to say something?" Wheeler groaned and said seriously, "I'm already horny and thirsty." Pop. Lee Kyan-hoon blew out a pink bubble of chewing gum and said in an ambiguous tone, "Where are you talking about?" Wheeler suddenly looked at Lee Kyan-hoon affectionately. "What do you think?" Lee Kyan-hoon shuddered and pointed at Wheeler with a disgusted look on his face. I surrender. Isn't it okay for me to treat you to a meal?" Wheeler smiled and said to Lee Kyan-hoon, "You are too naive." Lee Kyan-hoon curled her lips, then smiled happily and praised Wheeler, "You are worthy of being my buddy. This can't tempt you." Before, she always succeeded in using this trick on other people. Wheeler looked Lee Kyan-hoon up and down and questioned, "You also consider this a temptation?" He is a man who is calm even when he rides a motorcycle with Black Widow. Bobby and Katie couldn't help laughing out loud. "Yes, you laughed too loudly," Lee Kyan-hoon said with a dark face. "Katie, believe it or not, I will kill you." Katie screamed and rushed towards Lee Kyan-hoon. Lee Kyan-hoon hid behind Wheeler. Wheeler stretched out his hand to stop Katie and said solemnly, "Miss, please calm down. Don't hurt my meal ticket." Lee Kyan-hoon pushed Wheeler. "Go to hell. Bastard." "Hey. Stop it." Bobby looked at the three people speechlessly and pointed not far away. "A lot of people are coming. It seems that they are looking for Wheeler. I also saw John. Go." Wheeler immediately got rid of the two and sat in the co-pilot seat of the red sports car. "John is so scary. You are my god." Wheeler still has thunder in his ears when he thinks of this sentence now. Lee Kyan-hoon sat in the driver's seat with a smile. After Bobby and Katie got in the car, he started the accelerator and left the school. This is her car. Her parents left her a considerable inheritance. She is definitely a small rich woman in school. Accompanied by dynamic and passionate music, the car sped along and arrived at Chinatown in New York. It's called a street, but it's more like a small town. Walking into Chinatown, compared to Katie and Bobby who were full of curiosity, Wheeler and Lee Kyan-hoon seemed to be at ease. "Come with me. I just found a new restaurant not long ago. The taste is very authentic." Lee Kyan-hoon pointed the road in front and explained to Wheeler happily. He seemed to think of something delicious and licked the corner of his mouth gently. Wheeler was looking forward to it. He hadn't had a good Chinese meal for a long time. Bobby said expectantly, "Do you have zuozong chicken?" Wheeler and Lee Kyan-hoon turned around, their faces full of disgust. "Shut up." Bobby shrank his neck and muttered softly, "Okay." A moment later, under the leadership of Lee Kyan-hoon, everyone came to a restaurant full of Chinese decoration characteristics. The restaurant is not big, only one floor. In addition to the open kitchen, there are only more than 10 tables. The four of them found a table and sat down. Lee Kyan-hoon shouted in Chinese, "Boss. Let's order." "Oh. You're from the same hometown." Hearing the familiar language, the restaurant owner, who seemed a little cold at first, strode over with a warm smile on her face and said with a smile, "What do you want to eat?" Lee Kyan-hoon looked at Wheeler, who recited a series of dishes in Chinese without blinking. The owner looked at Wheeler's face in surprise. "Young man, I didn't realize that you are also from the same hometown." Judging from his facial features, Wheeler did not look like a Chinese. Wheeler smiled and nodded. "Is that all?" the proprietress asked, and suddenly lowered her voice and said to Wheeler, "Handsome boy, do you have a girlfriend?" Wheeler smiled and said, "No, boss lady, you have to keep an eye on her for me." The proprietress smiled happily and patted Wheeler on the shoulder. "No problem, leave it to me, beautiful sister." Lee Kyan-hoon blinked and said pitifully, "I'm so hungry, I've been waiting for this meal." Wait? It'll be ready soon, I promise you'll have a good meal." The proprietress patted her chest, enthusiastic and kind, and asked the waiter to bring water and drinks to Wheeler and the others. "Waiter, we want to return the dishes. These dishes are too spicy." Two men, one black and one white, shouted to the proprietress. The proprietress glanced at Wheeler and Lee Kyan-hoon, nodded with a smile, then turned and walked towards the two of them, looked at the empty plates, and said expressionlessly, "Where are the dishes?" The black youth angrily said, "Are you going to leave us hungry?" The proprietress had a bland expression. "Sorry, you can't refund." The white youth snorted, "You must refund. Otherwise I will give your store a bad review on the review website." The black youth winked at the proprietress. "Huh, my buddy is a gourmet, with more than 10,000 followers, and you don't want to." Without waiting for the other party to finish speaking, the proprietress sneered and pointed at the door of the restaurant. "Get out." The two were stunned. The white youth said in disbelief, Review your mother's head. You know shit about food. Get out right now. Are you begging for food from me?" The proprietress scolded the two of them angrily. Seeing that they wanted to say something, she slammed the table and sneered, "If you keep talking nonsense, I will throw you out." The two looked at each other, and saw that the boss was looking at them coldly from the kitchen with a knife, and left the restaurant in shame. "You idiot. Do you think I want your business?" The lady boss cursed, turned around and smiled at Lee Kyan-hoon and Wheeler. "Wait a minute, the food will be ready soon." Wheeler and Lee Kyan-hoon gave the lady boss a thumbs up, but Bobby and Katie swallowed nervously. Soon, the dishes were all served. Wheeler looked at the familiar dishes, smelled the tempting aroma, called Bobby and the others, and started eating impatiently. It took so long, he was so greedy. Seeing Wheeler's devouring appearance, Bobby and Katie tried a bite, and then their eyes lit up. "Although it's a little spicy, it's delicious, of course." Lee Kyan-hoon raised his chin proudly. After a while, Wheeler was satisfied with the food and felt comfortable to the bone. "Thank you," Wheeler thanked the lady boss seriously. In this familiar taste, he found a warm feeling. The fatigue and gloom accumulated during this period due to fighting those shadows, becoming a mutant, and other problems were completely dispelled by this familiar feeling. P.S. Some readers said that they were confused when reading chapter 37. I guess they were afraid of being censored and wrote it too cryptically. Now it has been changed and it should be clear. It means that when Murat is transformed, the oppression is very strong. It is Omega level. Chapter 40 Teaching Tools. Monday, sunny. In the music classroom of X school. As the black and white keys rise and fall, beautiful notes jump out from Murat's fingertips like dancing elves. Wheeler looked at Murat's back, his eyes full of confusion. How did he become a terrorist? How is it? Murat put down his hands and said hesitantly, "It's still a bit backward, but I should still be able to teach people, right?" Wheeler raised his eyebrows slightly, not hiding the surprise on his face, and said, "Even if I don't understand music, I can hear that your level is not low enough to teach students." "That's good." Murat breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. Wheeler waved his hand and said, "I'm going to class." Because Murat hadn't played the piano for a long time, he was unsure about teaching students, so he called Wheeler specifically to listen to Wheeler's opinion. Leaving the music classroom, Wheeler glanced at his schedule. "Huh? Is it the ability mastery class?" Wheeler muttered and strode to the classroom. In X school, only the ability mastery class is a daily course, which is taught by Jean, Ororo, and Scott. Wheeler, following the call, Bobby and Peter caught up with Wheeler. Wheeler nodded to the two of them, as if to say hello. Bobby asked, "Go to the ability mastery class?" "Yes," Wheeler replied. Peter looked at Wheeler and said in a muffled voice, "Rare." Wheeler laughed dryly. Indeed, the number of classes he has taken in school can be counted on one hand. Bobby said with a frown, "Scott's class today. I really want other teachers to teach." Wheeler asked curiously, "Scott? What's wrong with him?" Peter frowned. "Very strict. Compared with Jean and Ororo, Scott has very high requirements for students' ability control. Not only does he require students to master their own abilities, but he also requires them to use their abilities in actual combat. Therefore, when Scott is teaching, he will occasionally call students out for actual combat exercises. Of course, actual combat exercises are limited to senior students, and Iceman Bobby and Colossus Peter happen to be senior students. After hearing Bobby's explanation, Wheeler actually became interested. It's not that he likes fighting, but he wants to see more special abilities. Wheeler and the two walked into the classroom, and many people immediately looked at Wheeler and greeted Wheeler in a friendly manner. There were not many people in the classroom, only about 20 people, but most of them were senior students. At this moment, Someone screamed, "It's Wheeler." Doesn't this mean that it is possible to see Wheeler's battle? To see Wheeler's abilities, the classroom was quiet for a moment, and suddenly remembered that today's teacher was Scott, and then wailed. "I don't want to train with him in actual combat. I'm dying, my stomach hurts." Bobby looked at Wheeler, his face full of rejection. "I don't want to train with you in actual combat either." They have all seen Wheeler's fighting videos. Wheeler's combat experience is much richer than theirs, and the skills of using abilities are not at the same level. At this moment, the door of the classroom was pushed open, and Scott, wearing dark red glasses, walked in. "Everyone sit down," he said lightly, and his cold voice carried a special pressure. Crash! Everyone sat down obediently. Wheeler sat down next to Bobby. Wheeler was not afraid of Cyclops Scott like other students. Scott crossed his arms and looked at everyone, saying coldly, "You are afraid before the fight. What will you do when you encounter a real fight in the future? Kneel down and beg for mercy." He often carried out missions to rescue mutants outside. He had seen many tragic things and many mutants who became experimental subjects. So he knew very well how important courage was, and how necessary it was for a mutant to master his mutant abilities. The classroom was silent, but Wheeler agreed with Scott's words. Scott's face showed a sneer. "Come on. Today, each of you will fight Wheeler." Suddenly, everyone's face fell. "Wheeler, are you kidding? Four-eyed boy? Are you treating me as a training tool?" Wheeler looked at Scott with empty eyes. Scott raised his lips slightly and said to everyone, "Follow me." To the training ground. As a teacher, he couldn't go out to help these children accumulate practical experience, nor could he be ruthless and let them remember the pain they deserved, which made him very distressed. But it was different for Wheeler. The troubles he had been having were solved just like that, so that he, who was calm and composed, became brisk in his steps. The ability training ground of X School was very large, located behind the school's castle-like building. There was a small lake next to the training ground, and the small lake was half surrounded by dense woods. Because of the beautiful scenery and strong concealment, this was a gating place for the school. But now, it has become a battlefield with screams. 1, 2, 3 Wheeler used energy pokers to blow up students one by one. If he didn't want to see the mutant abilities of these people would not even have the opportunity to show their abilities. Phantom, body deformation, fragmentation, inflicting pain. Wheeler has seen several mutant abilities, but he feels more and more bored. These abilities are good for fighting, but their combat awareness is too poor. Wheeler precisely controlled the energy intensity. After blowing another boy away, he raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at Scott. Scott's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. He couldn't help but shout to the remaining students, "You are weaker than Wheeler. Why don't you take action first? Are you waiting to be beaten into pigheads? This is a battle. Do you understand the battle?" The school protected these children too well, and the world was too malicious to mutants. If they really encountered the kind of situation he least wanted to see in the future, the mutant ability might be the only thing they could rely on in that dangerous situation. Scott looked at Peter. Peter nodded, and while walking towards the training ground, he had already used his ability to turn himself into a Silver Iron Man. Colossus? Although the current Colossus may also lack combat experience, this ability is very powerful. Wheeler's eyes flickered, and he finally cheered up. I don't know to what extent Peter has developed his ability. A thought flashed through Wheeler's mind. Looking at Colossus rushing towards him like a human tank, he waved his hands and a large number of energy cards flew out. Boom, boom, boom. A series of explosions sounded, but Colossus only took 2 steps back and rushed forward with a more ferocious attitude. Chapter 41 Teaching. The charge of the Steel Warrior is unstoppable. Even a real tank would be knocked away by this guy. Wheeler's eyes flickered, and he entered the super body state, dodging the charge of the Steel Warrior and pointing his finger at the Steel Warrior. The next second, a madly spinning energy ball appeared at his fingertips and fell on the Steel Warrior like a cannonball. Duong! Energy exploded, and with a crisp sound of metal collision, the impact was accompanied by a fierce wind and swept around. The body of the Steel Warrior shook twice, and there was no scar on his body. Wheeler's mouth twitched. This guy is too tough and is completely immune to this level of attack, but Wheeler can't stand this guy. I hate fighting such an enemy the most. Wheeler muttered in his heart and avoided the Steel Warrior who was rushing over again. When the Steel Warrior flashed past him, he clenched his hands hard, and a two-handed hammer formed by energy quietly appeared. Wheeler swung it and hit the back of the Steel Warrior. Boom! Amid the explosion, the hammer exploded, and Steelix was blown away, his body rubbing against the ground, leaving a gully. Steelix shook his head and stood up from the ground. Seeing this scene, the students watching cheered. Finally, he was not killed instantly by Wheeler. Steelix bent his legs, and his metal body reflected a dazzling light in the sun. "Wheeler, be careful," he said in a muffled voice, and leaped towards Wheeler like a metal beast. Wheeler was stunned for a moment, and then laughed softly. "This guy is anxious." Wheeler's eyes flashed with blue light, and he had already left the original place. Looking at Steelix who was rushing down, he opened his right palm, and strands of energy flew out from his palm, like blue silk threads wrapped around Steelix's head. Bang! Steelix landed, but his head was already wrapped by a large number of energy lines. He lost his vision and panickedly grabbed the energy lines wrapped around his head. Snap! Wheeler snapped his fingers, and the blue energy exploded instantly. Colossus shook his dizzy head, staggered backwards, and his body slowly lost its metallic luster. Seeing this scene, the students watching the game exclaimed, and looked at Wheeler with more admiration. Colossus sat up from the ground, held Wheeler's hand, and gently shook it and stood up. "I lost," Peter said generously, looking at Scott a little embarrassed. Although the explosion just now did not cause any harm to him, it made him lose control of his abilities. Scott said lightly, "Remember this battle, don't expose your weaknesses easily." After saying that, he looked at Bobby. "It's your turn." Bobby touched his nose, responded in a low voice, walked to the training ground, and took the lead in attacking Wheeler. Bobby aimed his hand at Wheeler, and the frost mixed with the low temperature of the frozen air swept towards Wheeler like a fountain. Wheeler flashed, easily dodged Bobby's attack, and kept approaching Bobby. Bobby retreated, facing Wheeler's attack, and just aimed his other hand at Wheeler, spraying out a frost fountain again, trying to catch Wheeler. The temperature dropped rapidly, and a layer of white frost appeared on the lawn, but it did not cause any harm to Wheeler. He has great ability, but no skills at all, just like a faucet. Wheeler made an evaluation in his mind, and he had already circled behind Bobby and tapped Bobby's head gently. Bobby touched his head and said, "I lost." Scott looked at this scene, sighed, and said to Bobby, "Bobby, you should learn more about the use of ability from Wheeler. Bobby has great potential, but lacks the talent and imagination to use his ability." According to Professor X, it is because of Bobby's fear of ability. Bobby smiled at Wheeler and said, "Thank you. You showed mercy and didn't blow me out." Wheeler patted Bobby on the shoulder as a response. Scott looked at the remaining students and said coldly, "Continue." Since he had said that all students should fight Wheeler, he would definitely do it. After a while, the battle was over. Scott's face was extremely ugly. Although he knew that the gap between others and Wheeler was a little big, it was too big. No one could pose an effective threat to Wheeler. "Remember today's lesson?" Scott looked at everyone coldly and said seriously, "You cannot participate in the battle, but you must learn to fight. Remember, your mutant ability is the most trustworthy thing." This point was deeply experienced during the days when he was used as an experimental subject when he was young, and this was also the main reason why he strictly required these children to learn to fight. The students had different expressions, some were thoughtful, and some did not care. Scott glanced at the young faces, sighed in his heart, and then said coldly, "Get out of class, dismissed." Before he finished speaking, the students clattered and disappeared quickly in the training ground like surprised little animals. Through this battle, I dare not say how much these children have learned, but it is certain that they have a preliminary understanding of Wheeler's strength and admire Wheeler more and more. This point was deeply felt by Wheeler when he walked on the campus after the actual combat training class that day. Almost all the students in the school knew him. When they met him, they would greet him in a friendly way. Some students who were more concerned about their abilities would even ask him for advice on how to use their abilities. Among these people, there was Bobby, and Bobby was the most concerned one. In terms of using abilities, Bobby was also aware of his shortcomings, so in the past week, whenever he had time, he would find Wheeler and ask Wheeler to help him train his abilities. Wheeler did have a lot of ideas about Bobby's abilities. After all, there were a lot of animations and games for him to refer to. After a week of training, Bobby's attack methods were much richer. At this time, on the training ground, Bobby stood quietly in the center of the training ground, with a large amount of frost power condensing on his hands, turning his palms into cold frost blue. Improvement from yesterday. You must control it well, Wheeler, who was standing outside the training ground, said, and a smile appeared on Bobby's face. Keep going, Wheeler shouted, and Bobby's expression became serious. The next second, a crystal clear ice appeared in front of Bobby, and his palm, which was condensed with a lot of frost power, slapped it fiercely. Crack! With a crisp sound, the ice broke, and the broken ice flew out like a sharp blade with a lot of frost power. Sizzle! The ice blade cut the air, leaving a white trace of frost, and as long as the ice blade touched something, in addition to leaving a cut scar, a layer of frost appeared. Seeing this scene, Bobby waved his arms excitedly. Wheeler! I succeeded, Wheeler raised his eyebrows and smiled. Congratulations, Wheeler. Thank you so much. What do you want to eat tonight? I'll treat you, Bobby looked at Wheeler excitedly. Eat, Wheeler. Professor X's voice suddenly rang in Wheeler's mind. Professor? What's wrong? Wheeler raised his eyebrows slightly. Is there another mission? Wheeler muttered in his heart. Wheeler, Logan and the others are in trouble. After hearing the professor's words, Wheeler's face became extremely solemn. The first day of April, please vote for me. Please read on. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42 I Am the Captain. Wheeler took a deep breath, his face was more serious than Bobby had ever seen. What's wrong? What happened? Bobby asked in confusion. Wheeler said in a deep voice, the professor has something to talk to me about. Let's talk about dinner later. After saying that, he left quickly without giving Bobby a chance to ask questions, and even unconsciously entered the super body state. Wheeler was like a cold wind, crossing the campus and coming to Professor X's office. After knocking on the door, Wheeler pushed the door open and rushed in. Professor, what's going on? Wheeler supported his desk with both hands and asked Professor X, who was also serious. Professor X rubbed his eyebrows. Sit down first, wait for Scott and the others to come, and I will talk together. Wheeler nodded and sat on the sofa. A moment later, Scott, Hank, and Murat, who had just joined the school not long ago, also came to the office. Seeing Wheeler, Murat sat down beside Wheeler cheerfully and asked quietly, what happened? He was just in class when Hank called him out of the classroom with a confused look on his face. He had no idea what happened. Wheeler's eyes sank. It's related to Logan's mission. Logan, Murat pinched his chin and muttered, is that the man you call Wolverine? When he came to the school, Logan and Ororo had just left the school to investigate the shadow, so the two had never met. Wheeler nodded and looked at the silent Professor X, waiting for the professor to speak. Scott said anxiously, Professor. What's going on? Jean, what happened to them? Professor X's face was not as gentle as usual, but rather as cold as winter. He looked at the four people and said slowly, if I'm not mistaken, they were caught. Is it Stryker? Hank frowned worriedly, and then murmured in disbelief, but how is it possible? How strong is the combination of Ororo, Logan, and Jean? Can those three people be caught by the shadows that sneaked into the school? Professor X seemed to guess what Hank was thinking, and then said with a serious face, so, Stryker must have hidden power, which is much stronger than we imagined. Scott worriedly said, could the military be involved? If so, it would be a big deal. This is the worst plan, Professor X whispered, but Murat didn't seem to care. Wheeler said calmly, are these important? Everyone was silent for a while, and Scott said coldly, you're right, these are indeed not important, regardless of whether Stryker has hidden power or not, whether he's related to the military or not, they have only one choice, that is to rescue Logan and the other two. Hank looked at Professor X and said, can you find them? Professor X's eyebrows twisted together, and a clear worry appeared in his deep eyes. After losing contact with them, I used the brainwave machine to find them as soon as possible, but I couldn't sense their existence at all. They seemed to have disappeared. This is the real reason for his worry. If he couldn't sense Logan and the other two, there were only two reasons. They were dead, or something blocked his telepathic ability. Scott's face turned pale, and he obviously thought of the possibility of death. Don't worry, they won't be killed so easily, at least Logan can't, Wheeler said firmly, and asked Professor X, where was the last time they contacted you? Professor X felt a little ashamed. He was not as determined as Wheeler about whether Logan and the other two were alive. He recalled and said, Canada, Alkali Lake. Scott immediately said, I'll go prepare the fighter plane. Wait, Wheeler called Scott, stood up, and said, you stay in school, Murat and I will go. You too. Scott looked at Wheeler and frowned. Too dangerous? Dangerous? Of course I know. After a pause, Wheeler said faintly, but the school needs you more. School? Scott was stunned for a moment, then reacted. You mean, those shadows? That's right. Wheeler nodded and said, the shadows' initial target was the school. If Logan and the others' disappearance was just a bait, the school must retain a certain amount of strength, Scott said without hesitation. The professor is in the school. No matter how many enemies come, the professor can handle it. Really? Wheeler reminded. Did you forget that the professor just said that he couldn't sense Logan and the others? If Logan and the others are alive and the professor can't sense them, Scott's face turned pale. They have ways to defend against the professor's abilities, just like Magneto. Hank said worriedly, but Logan and the other three were caught, and you and Murat are too. Murat's mouth twitched. Do you look down on me? Hank nodded without hesitation. Murat, can we still stay in this broken school? At this moment, Professor X's eyes condensed, as if he had made a decision, and said, in that case, then start the second generation X-Men plan. Hank said in surprise. Charles, are you serious? At this time, as the number of conflicts between humans and mutants continued to increase, the X-Men seemed to be less and less. The second generation of X-Men was something that Professor X had been planning for a long time. Wheeler was one of the targets of the investigation and was the captain candidate that Professor X had decided on. Scott was also shocked and said, Professor, those kids are not ready yet. Thinking of the kids who fought with Wheeler in the previous class, Scott was worried. With that kind of performance, can they really become qualified X-Men? Professor X said in a deep voice, no one is really ready when facing these things. When you were young, wasn't it the same when you faced those crises? I believe they are no worse than us. They just need a little time and some training. He has a gentle personality, but he is very decisive in doing things. Hank said solemnly, Charles, think about it. They may face injuries or even death. Professor X nodded, looked at Wheeler, and said solemnly, from today on, you are the captain of the second generation of X-Men. Professor X has never been an indecisive person. Once he makes up his mind, he is more resolute than anyone else. It was like this when he parted ways with Magneto, and it is still the same today. Wheeler was stunned. What's going on? Wasn't he talking about saving people? How did he become the captain of the second generation of X-Men? Wait, Wheeler looked at Professor X speechlessly. Professor, let's not talk about captain or anything like that. I just have one question. Wheeler's eyes flashed with anticipation. Where are the others? Upon hearing this, Professor X's face flashed with embarrassment. That plan was a bit tasty, and the others are still investigating. You are the first one. Are you very happy, Wheeler? I'm so happy for you. I got infected with the H1N1 virus, and my brain is foggy. I feel groggy every day, I can't concentrate, and I'm dazed from time to time. I think of something to write, but when my hands are on the keyboard, it's suddenly clear. This thing is so uncomfortable. Chapter 43 Team Member Selection. X's office. Wheeler stared at Professor X, and the atmosphere between the two was awkward and tense. Here I am, I quit. Wheeler looked at Professor X angrily, as if he was kidding me. Hey. Listen to me. Professor X took out a stack of information from the drawer and explained quickly, this is the information of the candidates for investigation. You can choose the team members at will. Wheeler picked up the information and flipped through it quickly. Bobby, Peter, etc. These people who are familiar to Wheeler are on the list. Ability analysis, personality analysis, hobbies and strengths, growth environment. The information is very detailed. Seeing that Wheeler's face was calm, as if he was thinking about the team members, he said, some of them should be familiar to you, but when choosing team members, you have to consider their abilities and strengths. Bobby, Peter, Katie. Wheeler said 3 names in a row without hesitation. Originally, he wanted to choose Lee Kyan-hoon, but Lee Kyan-hoon's ability name, Lee Kyan-hoon ability, fireworks. Create energy balls of various colors and release them. Change the shape of energy balls, control and move them to designated locations, and detonate them when necessary. This ability overlapped with his own, so he gave up. As for a student who played with fire who was also on the list, Wheeler didn't even consider it. Although his combat ability is not bad, his personality is impatient, and you are mine. Bang! Wheeler closed the information and slapped the phantom that had just appeared in his mind out of his mind. 3 people. Hank looked at Wheeler in surprise. Don't you want to choose a few more? Wheeler said firmly. No, when carrying out a mission, the more people the better. Let's not talk about whether the ability is suitable or not, and secondly, he can't take care of more rookies. Scott agreed with Wheeler's choice. The abilities of Bobby and the other 2 are a very good match. Compared with Bobby and Peter, although Katie's auxiliary function is stronger, Katie is a genius. She is not only proficient in computers, but also speaks several languages. She can even drive various vehicles and has certain fighting abilities. Professor X groaned and said, "You are the captain, you have the final say, I will call them now. If they agree to join, the second generation of X-Men will be established." Wheeler nodded and smiled. Don't worry, they will join. He was still confident about this. A moment later, the 3 of them came to Professor X's office together. Wheeler? You are here too? Seeing Wheeler, the 3 were a little surprised. Katie moved sideways 2 steps, approached Wheeler, and asked in a low voice, "Do you know what the professor wants to talk to us about?" Wheeler looked at Professor X, and Professor X said to Wheeler, "You are the captain, it is better for you to announce it yourself, Captain." The 3 pricked up their ears, somewhat curious about Wheeler's identity. Wheeler nodded and smiled at the 3 of them. "Are you interested in joining the X-Men?" Hearing this, the 3 opened their mouths in surprise. Katie said excitedly, "X-Men? Us, to be precise, it's the second generation of X-Men," Wheeler added, and seeing that the 3 were anxious to say something, he raised his hand to the 3 and said seriously, "Listen to me, and then you can make a decision." Wheeler told the 3 about the mission and repeatedly emphasized the danger. The shadow that attacked the school? The captured teacher? The rescue operation? After listening to it, the 3 looked at each other and did not see the intention of retreating in each other's eyes, so they said firmly, "We will join." Very good, Wheeler smiled. Although Wheeler had guessed this result, he was sure that he had found the right teammate after getting the affirmative answer from the 3. Wheeler looked at the smiling Professor X. "Professor, we can start the action." Professor X responded and said to Scott, "They are handed over to you." Yes, Scott nodded and looked at Wheeler and the other 4 with satisfaction. "Come with me, there are some things I need to give you." After speaking, he strode out of the office. Wheeler followed with the 4 people. "Wait, there's me too," Murat said hurriedly. A moment later, everyone came to the basement of the school. There were special training rooms, medical rooms, data rooms, equipment rooms, and rooms dedicated to transportation. Scott introduced everyone and finally took everyone to the equipment room. "This is where we put our equipment," Scott introduced everyone. Wheeler took a quick look. There were communicators, some gadgets made by Hank, various cold and hot weapons, and a set of conspicuous X-Men uniforms. Seeing Wheeler looking at the X-Men uniforms, Scott explained, "This is the X-Men uniform, you can wear that one later." Scott pointed to a black uniform. Wheeler breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it was not the yellow one, which was too ugly. X-Men suits. Katie looked at the suits of different styles and asked in surprise, "So many sets?" Scott nodded calmly and explained, "Among these suits, some have commemorative value and are not usually used." He pointed to the all-yellow suits and the yellow and black suits and said, "These are the suits worn in previous battles. They are mainly yellow, while the current suits are mainly black. They are very easy to distinguish." Hearing this, Wheeler obviously noticed that Katie and the other 2 breathed a sigh of relief, and Murat said bluntly, "It's too ugly." Scott paused, then a smile broke out on his face. "It's really ugly. It was designed by Hank and the professor, so, although they didn't want to wear them at that time, their objection was ineffective." Ahem. Scott clenched his fist and coughed lightly, then continued, "In order to cope with various situations, the materials used to make the suits will also be different, but each suit has great ductility, so don't worry about it not fitting." He took out a few sets of black suits and handed them to Wheeler and the others, and handed them the matching communicators. He pointed to the dressing room on the site and said, "Go change your suits first. If you need weapons, come out and pick them out later." The few people picked up the suits quickly and walked into the dressing room and the equipment room. After a while, the 5 people changed into the X-Men suits. The suits were mainly black, with some silver-gray stripes, outlining their body curves. Not bad, Very energetic, Scott smiled and said, "Is there anything else you don't understand?" Wheeler shook his head. "We are ready and can set off." The few people said goodbye to Scott and walked into the room where the transportation tools were placed. Wheeler glanced at the quietly standing Blackbird fighter and said to Katie, "I'll leave it to you, no problem." Katie looked at the Blackbird fighter, her eyes sparkling, and rubbed her hands excitedly. "Let's go," Wheeler said lightly, and led the 4 people to the fighter. When the 5 people boarded the Blackbird fighter and the fighter jet spewed flames and took off, Professor X's voice rang in the minds of the 5 people. "X-Men, be careful." Chapter 44 X Factor. The sun was shining and the sky was clear. The black fighter flew across the sky like a big bird, leaving a white wave of air and diving into the vast sea of clouds. "Yahoo!" Katie cheered. The Blackbird fighter seemed to be a real flying bird under her control, showing its speed in the sky. "Amazing. This fighter is really amazing," Katie kept praising. "Of course, this is a Blackbird fighter, the fastest fighter in the world." Bobby looked as if it was a matter of course, with pride in his eyes that could not be hidden. The Blackbird fighter was designed by the X School. After Magneto and Beast, Hank designed the first-generation model. After decades of continuous research and development and improvement, the Blackbird fighter has long become the fastest fighter in the world. At this moment, a silent Peter suddenly asked Wheeler curiously, "By the way, what is your code name?" Wheeler's code name? The others pricked up their ears. Indeed, for such a long time, no one has ever said Wheeler's code name. Wheeler was silent. Bobby said in surprise, "Is there no code?" Wheeler said nonchalantly, "Isn't this a very normal thing?" Katie, Bobby, and even the taciturn Peter shouted together, "Not normal." Murat, who wanted to say it was normal, became hesitant and couldn't help asking, "Do you all have code names?" "Of course." Katie nodded solemnly and said quickly, "Bobby's code name is Iceman, Peter's is Steelman, and I'm Phantom Cat." "Wow," Murat exclaimed, seeing Bobby and Peter looking at him, and hurriedly said, "My name is Firewolf." "Yes, Firewolf." Wheeler looked at Murat with a squint. "You just gave yourself a code name, right?" Murat smiled embarrassedly and then said, "Now you are the only one without a code name." Wheeler shook his head. "No need," Katie said excitedly. "Then let's give you one." Suddenly, she felt a heavy sense of mission and an uncontrollable excitement. "This is Wheeler, the idol of all the students in the school." Bobby was the first to say, "How about calling it Blue Sun?" This nickname was based on the scene where Wheeler threw down the blue sun during the battle. Wheeler's eyes twitched. "I don't think it's good. Why does this name sound like it will be blown up by Superman?" Peter said seriously, "God of War." He remembered the scene where Wheeler defeated everyone in the classroom. Wheeler's eyelids rolled. "Bad, this code name sounds like it's asking for a beating." Murat said confidently, "Explosion Poker." "You must like it," Wheeler sneered. "Get out of here." "Then the Explosion Lord? The Duke of Destruction? The Explosion Angel?" Murat quickly said a series of code names with a smirk in his eyes. Wheeler's eyes twitched and he complained, "You and the Explosion are inseparable, right? How about Blue Light, Blue Pupils?" Katie asked carefully. "Not very good," Wheeler said helplessly. "Don't give me any code names. If you have this time, you might as well have more." Katie and the other 2 stared at Wheeler, as if he must have a code name. Looking at the expressions of both parties, Murat grinned. Wheeler's eyes jumped. "Why don't we give our team a new name? The second generation of X-Men is really ugly." Hearing this, Katie and the other 2 were stunned for a moment and began to discuss enthusiastically. Murat shrugged and said to Wheeler, "You are really good at changing the subject." Wheeler raised his eyebrows and said seriously, "When we reach the destination, I will leave it to you to find their traces." After Murat's transformation, in addition to the physical enhancement, his sense of smell will also become very strong, much more sensitive than the nose of a real wolf. "I'll try my best," Murat nodded. At this time, Katie smiled at Wheeler and said, "It's decided. We will call it X Factor." "Huh?" Wheeler's eyes lit up. "Not bad. It's much more reliable than the nicknames given to him. As for your code name, we can skip it, right?" Wheeler said coldly, squinting at the 3 people, with a hint of danger in his eyes. Bobby immediately said, "Then we'll talk about it later." Katie and Peter nodded reluctantly, and the fighter plane finally quieted down. Time passed little by little, and the Blackbird fighter plane was getting closer and closer to the destination. Suddenly, ding, ding. Wheeler's phone rang suddenly. "Tony." Wheeler was a little surprised, but he still answered the phone. "Hey. Wheeler. Where are you? I have good news to tell you. On a mission. Mission? Tony couldn't help but complain. Does your school exploit students like this? Do you need me to find you a lawyer? Wheeler looked at the fighter plane's navigation and found that they were almost at their destination. He said helplessly, "Stop talking nonsense. What's the matter?" "Captain Jack Sparrow of SHIELD asked me to be a lobbyist." "Nick Fury?" "Yes," Tony responded and said, "he asked me to send you an invitation." "Invitation? It can't be the Avengers, right?" Wheeler's eyes flashed, and he said, "What invitation?" "Invite you to join a team called the Avengers." "Sure enough." Wheeler raised his eyebrows and said, "What about you? Have you joined the Avengers?" "I can't help it. I owed them a favor before, and this time they also gave me benefits that I can't refuse." Tony's voice was helpless, but then he said seriously, "I'm just calling you for the sake of formality. You don't have to consider me." Wheeler raised his eyebrows. "Consider you? You're being sentimental." "Hey, give me some face," Tony said speechlessly, and then said, "Do you need help with your mission?" Wheeler smiled slightly. "Not yet, we can still handle it." "That's good," Tony responded, and then said vaguely and quickly, "By the way, I'm going to move Stark Building to New York, so this is the good news you said." "Yeah, haha, that's it." Tony laughed dryly and hung up the phone. Wheeler put the phone away and was about to look at the navigation when Katie said, "We're here." Wheeler looked down through the window. Snowflakes were dancing in the air, and cold-resistant plants such as pine and cypress were dotted on the white earth like emerald stars. The azure blue lake was like a sad eye, watching the slowly descending Blackbird fighter. This was their destination, Lake Alkali. The Blackbird fighter landed smoothly at the edge of a forest, and Weller and the other 5 got off the fighter. Katie turned on the fighter's environmental camouflage, and the Blackbird fighter disappeared in the frost and snow. "Huh?" Katie blew a breath on her palm, looked at Weller and said, "Where do we start?" Weller nodded to Murat and said to Katie, "Wait first." Murat growled, and in the surprised eyes of Katie and the other 2, he turned into a giant black wolf, identified the direction, and ran forward. "Please vote for me. Please vote for me." Chapter 45 Clues, Bait. Snowflakes kept falling, and Weller and the other 4 were waiting for news from Murat. After a while, a thin layer of snow covered the 4 of them. Weller exhaled a white mist, and looked at Bobby, who was enjoying himself, feeling a little envious. Frosty and snowy, it was Bobby's home court. Katie squatted on the ground, digging her hands in the snow, and piled up a snowman with great interest. Steelman Peter looked at the forest under the snow, and had the urge to take out the canvas and paint this beautiful scenery. Although he was a big guy, he was sensitive and loved painting very much. At this time, a black giant wolf ran towards them. It was Murat. "I hope there will be good news," Weller whispered in his heart, and when Murat kicked Katie's snowman apart and stopped in front of Weller, he asked, "How is it? Have you found any clues?" Although Weller's tone was still calm, everyone still felt the anxiety that was difficult to conceal. Murat grinned, looked back at Katie, who was pulling his wolf hair angrily, swung his tail with a puzzled look, pushed Katie aside, and said to Weller, "Found it." Weller breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Lead the way." Murat nodded and led the way, and Weller and the other 4 followed. A few minutes later, Murat stopped and scratched the snow on the ground with his claws, revealing a conspicuous red. "Is this blood?" "It can't be theirs," Katie asked worriedly. "Unfortunately, judging from the smell, it's Logan's," Murat gave the answer. Before leaving, he had memorized the smell of Logan and the other 2 through old clothes. Weller's face was calm. "Is it just him?" "Bleeding is very normal for Logan's fighting style." "Yes," Murat gave a good news, and then looked into the distance. "Because of the snow, although the smell is very faint, it clearly points out the direction." Weller asked thoughtfully, "Are there any strange smells ahead?" Murat nodded. "Yes, and quite a lot." "Did they find something? Did Logan and his team kill their way through? Or are they being hunted?" A series of questions flashed through Weller's mind, and he raised his chin to Murat. "Keep going," Murat responded and continued to lead the way in front of the smell. Soon, everyone followed the traces and clues along the way and came to a place not far from an abandoned dam. Under the cover of ice and snow, part of the black and gray structure of the dam was exposed, looking like a beast lying on the ground, lingering on. The Alkali Lake Dam was once a very famous dam in the local area, but for unknown reasons, it was suddenly abandoned. Looking at the dam not far away, Weller's face was solemn. "In the dam? Are you sure? The smell is very fresh and clear." Murat nodded very confidently. What are we waiting for? Katie was eager to try. She rescued the 3 teachers as a hero, and she couldn't wait to see the expressions of the 3 teachers. Bobby touched his head and whispered, I feel something is wrong. Katie was puzzled and asked, where? Weller said lightly, this is all too simple and too smooth. It's as if they were afraid that we wouldn't be able to find the clues, so they left them on purpose. As they walked along, the smell and traces of fighting were too obvious. Is it a trap? Katie was a little nervous. Peter folded his arms and nodded. It's obvious. Katie was tangled and said, then what should we do? Should we ask the school for help? Weller shook his head and said in a deep voice, the school should also be in danger, and I'm afraid it can't provide any support. As soon as the words came out, the expressions of Katie and the other 2 were a little unbelievable. Bobby said in surprise, impossible. The professor is in the school, that's why. Wheeler shook his head and said, everyone thinks that a school with a professor will not face any threats at all, but once there is something that can resist telepathy, Peter added in a muffled voice, that's it. Bobby hesitated and said, what should we do? Go back to school? No. Wheeler shook his head and said, we have to rescue the bait. This is our mission, Katie said worriedly. The school. Wheeler spread his hands, that's why we are here, not Scott and Hank. Huh? Bobby and the other 2 breathed a sigh of relief. The school just needs to be alert to this situation. Wheeler looked at the dam and ordered, Peter, tell the school about this in advance. Colossus responded, took out his mobile phone and called the school. Katie, come in with me first, and the others wait here, Wheeler said to everyone, and went to the dam with Katie. Katie held Wheeler's hand and reminded him, it may be a little uncomfortable when you cross, and you can't breathe, so pay attention to this. Yeah, Wheeler nodded, and was a little curious about what this experience was like. The next second, Katie pulled Wheeler forward, and the 2 disappeared in the thick concrete wall like a phantom. Wheeler's vision was dark, but he just moved forward quickly with Katie's footsteps. Originally, he thought that entering the wall would feel like entering the water, but in fact he didn't feel any resistance at all, as if the wall had turned into air. Suddenly, the 2 passed through the wall, and their vision suddenly recovered. Plop! Katie was startled when she heard the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground. After seeing that it was a camouflage, fully armed soldier falling to the ground, Katie looked at Wheeler in surprise. Wheeler's reaction was too fast. If he was slower, the soldier who happened to see them passing through the wall would have sounded the alarm. This was a damp passage, with shallow water on the ground, moss on the walls, and some wires sticking out from the cracks in the wall. Under the dim light, they looked like venomous snakes with bared fangs and claws. Katie shrank her neck in fear. Wheeler said to Katie, I'll watch here, you bring Murat and the others in. Katie nodded, turned around and sank into the wall again. Wheeler looked at the unconscious soldier, searched the soldier's body, and after not finding anything useful, he hit the soldier again, making him faint more thoroughly, and then he leaned against the wall and waited quietly. After a while, Katie took Bobby and the other 2 through the wall twice and appeared in front of Wheeler. Then, according to the previous plan, act separately, Wheeler gently tapped the communicator in his ear and said, contact us at any time. The 4 nodded silently. Steele and Murat ran to the left of the passage, while Katie rushed straight forward and sank into the wall. Wheeler waved to Bobby, and the 2 walked in the other direction of the passage. P.S. Dear readers, please cast your votes if you have any, thank you. Chapter 46 Found. Alkali Lake Dam. Unlike the dilapidated outside, the dam is full of lights and people. In the passages, fully armed soldiers walked back and forth in the dam. Various advanced experimental equipment was placed in the laboratories. Experimenters in white coats operated the instruments and studied the suspicious human-shaped objects on the laboratory tables. A little blue light flashed in the darkness like a flickering firefly. Plop. A patrolling soldier was knocked down by Wheeler. Wheeler lifted the soldier's body and gently placed it on the ground. The blue light in his eyes faded, and he nodded to Bobby in the dark, and the 2 continued to move forward. Along the way, Wheeler had dealt with several soldiers and searched several rooms. Unfortunately, apart from some disgusting experimental materials, Logan and the other 2 were not found. At this moment, Katie's voice sounded in the communicator. So Lucky, I think I found the design drawings of the dam. Hearing Katie's voice, Wheeler was shocked and lowered his voice to say, can you find some suspicious places? I'm looking, Katie responded, and suddenly said, Weller, you are so lucky to choose me as a team member. What do you mean? Bobby asked curiously. There is only one passage to enter the dam, which is the transformation of the spillway inside the dam. It is full of monitors and sensors. Unauthorized people entering the passage, Murat added, will be flooded directly. That's right. Katie nodded and said with a smile, do you feel lucky when you say that? She slid her fingers on the design drawings, looking for some suspicious areas, and suddenly her eyes lit up. At the end of the spillway, there is a small door that leads to the inside of the base. In addition to this, there is another layer below. Katie pointed out the suspicious places one by one, and then said, before you act, you should tell me the location so that I can show you the way. We are in fact now, Murat cursed in a low voice, accompanied by fierce gunfire. We've been discovered. Be careful of those shadows, they've appeared. As soon as he finished speaking, the sounds of roars and battles came from the communicator. Be careful, Weller said lightly, having already prepared himself for the discovery of Murat and Peter. Or rather, these two were meant to attract firepower and cause commotion in the base. Weller looked around and said, we are now near some laboratories, and there are many biological samples in those laboratories. Then you should be. Katie's finger landed on a corner of the map, and she said in surprise, I've determined your location. Next, you can go into the third passage on your right. It leads to the underground, and you can search the next level first. There should be a prison and a solitary confinement room. Weller and Bobby nodded. Okay, Katie put away the design and said, then I'll continue to look for evidence. I'll contact you later. Good luck. After hanging up the communication, Weller and Bobby started moving. At the same time, in the control room of the base, an old man with gray hair, a slightly fat body, and a pair of glasses on his nose was watching the fight between Murat and the other man through the monitor. In the picture, the black giant wolf and the silver metal man rushed among the soldiers, ignoring the bullets falling on them, while the soldiers who were shouting and screaming retreated in fear. Is it the mutant who just joined the X school? The old man murmured in a low voice, looking at Murat as if he was looking at some interesting experimental materials. Sir, the soldiers can't stand it anymore, the sergeant with thin hair reported to Stryker. Stryker said lightly, send the mutant weapons of the 035 and 025 series. I want to live, whether it is Murat who turned into a wolf or the Colossus who had been listed as his target for a long time, they are all precious experimental materials. The sergeant nodded and knocked his hands quickly on the operating table. As he operated, a cold electronic sound rang out in a dark room in the base. Weapons activated. A few seconds later, expressionless, machine-like people walked out of the dark room, and then disappeared like a ball of melted ink into the shadows under their feet. Seeing this scene through the monitor, the sergeant in charge of the operation breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, Stryker said, let the weapons ambushed near the school move. X school is his main target. These X-Men who attacked the base were just small fish and shrimps that he deliberately attracted as bait in order to weaken the power of X school. Maybe there are more than these two X-Men who sneaked into the base, but he didn't care at all, and even thought that the more they came, the better. Because the more X-Men here, the weaker the school's defense will be, and the higher the success rate of his plan will be. You asked for this, Stryker murmured, with a cold light in his eyes. For some reason, he had temporarily given up the plan to attack X school and seize precious materials. But he didn't expect that X school would hold on to it and keep investigating the source of the shadows, and even colluded with SHIELD. Moreover, they really found out something. What made him even more angry was that Logan and his two companions, based on the intelligence provided by SHIELD, destroyed his two secret bases in a short period of time, causing him to suffer heavy losses and lose a lot of precious mutant materials. If this continues, more bases will be destroyed, and even some evidence will be found, causing those stupid politicians to put him in jail. Therefore, he can only start the plan to attack X school again. A series of thoughts flashed through Stryker's mind. After seeing that the Shadow series of mutant weapons had arrived at the battlefield of Murat and Peter, he watched with interest. On the other side, as Murat and Peter made more and more noise, the soldiers patrolling in the base heard the noise and rushed over, which made it much easier for Weller and Bobby to move. The two walked into the passage Katie mentioned and found the stairs leading to the next floor. They walked down the stairs carefully, and suddenly the view in front of them was clear. There's up. The soldier who was on guard at the stairs had just raised his gun, and before he remembered to pull the trigger, the blue card cut across his throat like a knife. Blood spurted out, and the card turned into a blue light spot and dissipated. Wheeler dragged the body to a corner and continued to walk forward with Bobby. The two quietly dealt with several soldiers guarding the prison. After searching several rooms, they finally found Logan and his two companions in a cell at the deepest end. Logan and his two companions closed their eyes and were tied to a cold laboratory table. Wheeler and Bobby breathed a sigh of relief when they saw the three unconscious people. Just as Wheeler and his two companions were about to rescue Logan and his two companions, ripples appeared in the dark corners of the room. Chapter 47 Unlimited Defense. In the cell where Logan and the other two were imprisoned. On the cold laboratory table, the limbs and bodies of Logan and the other two were tightly locked with silver metal rings. Bobby took a look and said worriedly, "We need a key." Wheeler's eyes flickered. "Let me try." They didn't have time to find the key that was somewhere unknown. Because the sound of the battle coming through the communicator became more and more intense. Through the conversation between Murat and Peter, they already knew that a large number of shadows had joined the battle. Murat and Peter were about to be unable to hold on. Wheeler's eyes flashed, and blue energy danced on his fingertips. When he pressed his finger on the keyhole, the blue energy was injected into the lock. The next second, with a slight explosion, the metal ring was blown apart. Seeing this scene, Bobby breathed a sigh of relief and was amazed at Wheeler's exquisite control. Wheeler spent some time destroying all the metal rings on the three people. Just as he told Bobby how to wake up the three people and was about to let Bobby do it, his eyes suddenly turned blue and he moved away from the spot. Swish! A dagger appeared at the position where Wheeler was just now. "It's those shadows," Bobby screamed, raised his palm, and sprayed a large amount of frost at the enemy. The expressionless enemy held the dagger, and his body seemed to melt, disappearing into the shadows under his feet with a layer of frost. "Damn! There are a lot of them." Noticing that the shadows around him were rippled like the surface of a lake, Bobby screamed. "You waked them up," Wheeler said to Bobby, and a large amount of energy surged from his palm, and under his control, it turned into cards, and revolved around them like fluttering butterflies. The next second, one enemy after another jumped out of the shadows like bloodthirsty sharks. Wheeler stretched out his arms, and the cards flew towards the enemy under his control like soldiers who had no hesitation. Boom, boom. Fierce explosions sounded in the room, and the strong winds that rolled up with the impact raged in the room. But there were still enemies who kept jumping out of the shadows in the room, and even a few shadows showed a second ability. Are they the shadows numbered 025? Shock waves, hot beams, and spitting acid. Several attacks fell on Wheeler and his group. Wheeler's eyes flashed, and blue energy was like a shield, protecting him and Logan. When the shadows wanted to launch a second wave of attacks, the energy shield shattered and turned into sharp blades that swept towards the shadows. Blade storm. Sizzle. The energy blades cut through, and the shadows quickly fell into the shadows under their feet, but there were still several more corpses that quickly turned into ashes. Wheeler's eyes burst into blue light, and he instantly entered the super body full power state. Suddenly, more energy was extracted by him, and under his control, it poured into the ground under his feet. The next moment, ripples appeared in the dark corner again. When a shadow jumped out of the shadow, blue energy suddenly emerged from the ground, like a blue spear, piercing the shadow's body and turning it into a corpse. The air seemed to solidify, as if an invisible storm was brewing in the small room. Suddenly, shadows jumped out from the dark corners of the room, but every time a shadow jumped out, a spear would emerge from the ground and pierce the shadow's body accurately. In the blink of an eye, there were several more corpses on the ground, and the room became quiet again. Even the shadows that were constantly rippling became quiet. Wheeler exhaled lightly, and a thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. At this time, if you look through the ground, you can see a layer of blue energy with Wheeler as the center point, like a carpet spread around him within a radius of 5 meters. As long as Wheeler is within this range, as long as Wheeler can bear and react, he can call on the energy arranged in advance to attack and defend without intervals, and even through the feedback of the energy, he can sense the surrounding environment. This is his newly developed ability and skill, which he calls unlimited defense. Of course, this ability also has many weaknesses. For example, the range is small and the consumption is high. The most important thing is that it cannot move, so it is called defense by Wheeler. But this skill, even though it has many weaknesses, is still powerful. The most important thing is that unlimited defense is just a prototype of the ability he conceived. So Wheeler didn't care about the current weakness. The room became quiet, and watching the corpses turn into ashes, Bobby breathed a sigh of relief. With so many enemies appearing just now, He almost thought Wheeler was going to give up the plan to rescue Logan and the others. Bobby's cold fingers pointed at Logan's forehead, and under his control, strands of frost power penetrated into Logan's mind. He wanted to use the cold temperature to stimulate Logan's head, trying to wake Logan up. After a few seconds, Logan suddenly opened his eyes, inhaled cold air and sat up. Wheeler? Bobby? What's wrong with you? Logan's eyes flashed with a moment of confusion, and then as if he remembered something, he said angrily, "Damn Stryker." As soon as the words fell, Logan jumped off the experimental table, like a mad beast. He was about to rush out for revenge. Wait, Wheeler stopped Logan and said in a low voice, "Wait a moment, let Bobby wake up Ororo and Jean." Logan's chest rose and fell violently, and he nodded with difficulty. After seeing the unconscious Jean and Ororo, a trace of self-blame appeared on his face. It was his fault that the three were caught. After a long period of treatment by the professor, he got some sporadic memories, although rare, but precious to him. When they came to the Alkali Lake Dam, some fragments of memories that made him angry and sad kept pouring out of his mind. Finally, after seeing Stryker, the scattered memories were activated, and some blurred pictures finally became clear. The dead wife, the adamantium injected into the body, and the destroyed peaceful life, all of this was related to Stryker. So, he was overwhelmed by hatred and anger, chasing Stryker all the way into the dam, and stepped into the spillway trap prepared by Stryker. In order to protect him, Jean and Ororo were also submerged by the huge amount of water with him, and then fainted. Logan's mind flashed back to the scene at that time. After seeing Jean and Ororo wake up, he immediately said, "Sorry, it's all my fault." Jean and Ororo were stunned for a moment, and finally remembered what happened before. Jean Grey's tone was still gentle, and she said to Logan, "It's good that you have calmed down now." Wheeler took a long breath and removed the unlimited defense he had been maintaining. Now these people no longer need his protection. Ororo jumped off the experimental table, moved her wrists, and asked Wheeler beside her, "So, you came to save us? What's the situation now?" Wheeler shook his head at the shadows that appeared again around him and smiled slightly. "The situation is obvious, huh?" Ororo sneered, "You came at the right time." She was now full of anger. Looking at the enemy emerging from the shadows, Ororo raised her hand and waved. In an instant, lightning danced wildly. Chapter 48 The Gentleman. Wheeler and his group rushed out of the underground prison. Murat and Peter were also running towards the prison. The two fought and retreated. Ordinary soldiers could not stop them at all, but as shadows joined the battle and attacked them from all dark corners, they could not hold on. On the other side, Ororo took the lead, sparks and lightning all the way. As long as she saw the enemy, there would be lightning and thunder training. At this time, Ororo was like a violent thunderstorm. She was very angry now. It was not only because she was captured and Wheeler and his group risked their lives to rescue her, but more because the mutants imprisoned here were cruelly dissected like little white mice and became cold experimental materials. She remembered that when the three of them were captured and imprisoned in the prison below, there were still some mutants in the underground cell, but now it was empty. Was it transferred? Or Ororo did not dare to think about it, but the lightning she summoned became more violent when she raised her hand. Seeing this scene, Logan took a breath. It seems that even though Ororo was angry with him before, she didn't really do anything to him. Wheeler followed Ororo, and while he was on guard at the dark corners he passed by, he was relieved to see Ororo frying the fish. He had just maintained unlimited defense, which consumed a lot of his energy. "Ororo! Calm down," Jean Grey shouted, raised her hand and used invisible force to control a shadow that jumped out of the shadow, then broke its neck and threw it out. Losing your composure is not a good thing at any time, especially for mutants. "I'm calm, I'm just angry," Ororo said coldly, and after the last enemy in front of him was smoking with electricity, the violent lightning finally subsided. Jean Grey looked at Ororo helplessly, feeling a little sorry for her good friend. In X school, Ororo was the teacher who cared the most about the children, and there were 1 or 2 children in the cell before, but now their fate is unknown. This is the main reason for Ororo's anger. Ororo tilted his head to one side and whispered, "Let's go, Murat and the others need us." Everyone nodded and continued to rush forward, but before leaving, Wheeler flew out an energy card, which blew up the surveillance camera above everyone's head. This feeling of being monitored made him very uncomfortable. The image of the monitor stayed at the moment when Wheeler raised his hand to shoot the energy card. Stryker looked at Wheeler's face, and a smile suddenly bloomed on his wrinkled face. Haha, 003's growth rate is a little beyond imagination. Stryker laughed in a low voice. His eyes looked hot and eager. 003 was the project that the gentleman was personally responsible for, and it was the only existence that could not be replicated, and the other projects were more or less related to 003. His project was 005, which was the fusion of mutant abilities. He really wanted to capture 003 and conduct various experiments on 003, so as to make his project go further. So after knowing that 003 took advantage of the gentleman's sleep and escaped from the gentleman's secret base, he sent shadows to capture 003 so many times. Thinking of the gentleman, Stryker's face trembled unconsciously, and fear flashed in his eyes. Not long ago, the gentleman woke up from his sleep for a while, and he had to restrain himself and recall the shadows that captured 003. What surprised him was that after learning about 003's escape, the gentleman did not plan to capture 003 back. I don't know what that person's plan is, Stryker murmured, but a smile unconsciously bloomed on his face. No matter what the gentleman's plan is, now that 003 is delivered to his door, he will not miss it. Thinking of this, Stryker whispered to the soldier sitting in front of the control console, activate the variant weapons of the 015 series. 015, the soldier was shocked. This is the strongest variant weapon they have created, except for 005, which is the only one that exists as the master version. The number of 015 series mutant weapons is very small, but each one is very powerful, and each one has mastered 3 or even 4 mutant abilities. Unlike 025, the abilities of 015 series mutant weapons are not randomly given, but each one is carefully designed. You heard it right, Stryker said firmly, and then urged, hurry up, from the current situation, whether it is 025 or 035 series, if it does not reach a certain number, the threat to the X-Men who broke into the base is limited. Yes, sir, the soldier responded hurriedly and operated on the operating table. A few seconds later, 3 figures walked out of a dark room and disappeared into the shadows. Seeing this scene, Stryker sighed with some regret. Only 3? In order to deal with the X-School, a part of the 015 series weapons were sent out. Storm, Wolverine, Colossus, Blaziken, and Jean. Stryker thought about it, but still felt uneasy, so he said to the soldier, watch the battlefield and report the situation to me at any time. Yes, sir. After getting the soldier's response, Stryker left the control room alone and walked deep into the base. At the same time, after the 5 people of Wheeler killed several 025 series shadows again, they finally joined Murat and the others. Seeing Wheeler and the others, Murat and Colossus breathed a sigh of relief. Although the 2 of them were used to attract firepower in the plan, facing the enemies that kept appearing, their pressure was greater than they imagined. Peter, Bobby and Peter clapped their hands and praised, awesome, the 2 actually persisted for so long. Peter smiled embarrassedly and said, it's Murat who is awesome. Murat grinned, his eyes passed from Ororo and Jean to Logan. Is this Wolverine Logan? Doesn't it look like he has anything to do with wolves? Murat muttered in his heart. Weller said to everyone, let's go. He noticed that the shadows in some corners were rippling again. This was a sign that the shadows were about to appear. After this period of fighting, the ordinary soldiers who were basically useless had already withdrawn. Katie, what is the shortest route for us to meet you? Weller said on the communicator. Katie's ability is still the best way to leave this base. Katie said while typing on the computer, wait a minute, I'll look for it. Oh my god. I seem to have found something incredible, show the way first, Weller said lightly. Okay, restraining the shock in her heart, Katie opened the blueprint of the base and began to look for a route to leave. At this moment, Logan and Murat's noses suddenly moved twice, and they shouted together, be careful, something is coming. Amid the painful screams, Logan's chest was pierced by several sharp metals, and a woman in a black tight combat uniform slowly appeared in the air. Please vote for the monthly ticket. Please recommend. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49 Illusion. Is it the ability to be invisible? Seeing the woman suddenly appear, everyone was shocked. Logan, Ororo screamed, and the lightning appeared on her palm like a swimming snake. But Kim was faster. With a flash of her eyes, invisible telekinesis spread out and bombarded the woman who suddenly appeared. The woman was like being hit by an invisible hammer and flew away. The thin and sharp nails pulled out of Logan's body, taking away a few drops of blood. Ororo's lightning and Weller's energy card flew towards the woman. But at this time, another shadow jumped out of the shadow, and two red energy burst out from its eyes, colliding with Ororo and Weller's attacks. Boom! With a loud bang, the red energy dispersed the attacks of the two and continued to sweep towards Weller and Ororo. Weller and Ororo dodged, and the red energy beam left a big hole in the wall. In the dust, Murat roared and fiercely pounced on the new enemy with Peter. But boom! A burst of fire appeared from the shadows, hitting Murat and Peter, sending them flying. A shadow leaped out of the shadows, burning with flames, and attacked Murat and Peter. More enemies are appearing? Bobby screamed, looking at the enemies that kept emerging from the shadows, and the power of frost swept over. For a moment, the scene became extremely chaotic. Logan's wounds were fleeting, and he felt a little relieved when he saw the woman hitting the wall. Fortunately, this woman's first choice was him. Logan clenched his hands, stretched out his adamantium claws, and rushed forward with a roar. The indestructible claws drew a cold arc, and when the woman got up from the ground, they cut into the woman's neck without any delay. But a crisp sound of metal clashing made Logan's eyes widen. His claws were actually blocked. Looking at the woman's cold, dagger-like nails, he said in disbelief, "Is that adamantium?" The woman looked at Logan expressionlessly, and suddenly opened her mouth and screamed. Ah! The harsh sound waves hit Logan like a substance. Logan's muscles undulated like waves, and he was blown away with blood spitting out of his mouth. The woman chased him like a flexible big cat, and her 10 dagger-like nails stabbed Logan's body fiercely. At this time, blue energy cards flew over and landed on the woman. Boom! Amid the continuous explosions, the woman was blown away. But before she landed, her body disappeared into the air as if erased by an eraser. Invisible? Weller raised his eyebrows and said to Logan who got up, "Are you okay?" "No problem." Logan spat out the blood in his mouth, his nose twitching slightly, trying to find the opponent's position by smell and judge the opponent's attack. Weller lowered his palm, and energy cards appeared from his palm, flying around him. If he had seen it right, the woman's number was 015, and she seemed to have appeared in the plot. She was a mutant named Deathwoman. Compared with 025 and 035, 015 should represent more mutant abilities and stronger strength. Fast self-healing, sonic attack, invisibility, shadow jumping, plus adamant claws. This Death Woman is a very insidious assassin. In addition to this Death Woman, there are two enemies numbered 015, namely the bald man who is fighting with Jean and Bobby, and the short-haired man who is fighting with Murat and Peter. According to Weller's observation, the bald man has abilities similar to Cyclops, as well as a protective stance and the ability to shadow jump. He is simply a turret that can move quickly and has strong defense. Weller temporarily calls him the Turret Man. Facing Jean's invisible telekinesis, the light turret man stood on the edge of the darkness insidiously. As long as something went wrong, he would use the ability of shadow jumping to hide in the shadows, flash to a safe place, and then fire a deadly laser at Jean. If it weren't for Poppy's assistance and continuous frost attacks, Jean would be in danger. No, perhaps everyone would be in danger. The last short-haired man has shadow jumping, flame spraying, close combat flame explosion, and very strong close combat ability. He is temporarily called the Flame Man. Facing Peter and Murat's close combat attack, the Flame Man relied on his strong close combat ability and flame explosion to fight back and forth with it too. If faced with danger, he would not only use shadow jumping to avoid it, but also suddenly release a ball of explosive flame. In addition to the three enemies numbered 015, there are also many variant weapons of the 025 and 035 series that jumped out of the shadows, but they were all blocked by Ororo. The dazzling electric light ran between the enemies like a venomous snake, harvesting the enemies at an astonishing speed. If it weren't for the 025 series of mutant weapons that used long-range attacks to pin Ororo down and make her dodge constantly, Ororo might have ended a battle. However, even so, it wouldn't take much time for this battle to end. Because Poppy and Colossus were exchanging opponents, and Poppy's ability was very restraining to Flame Man. Wheeler quickly glanced at the battlefield, and suddenly found a new enemy jumping out of the shadow beside him. Without any hesitation, Wheeler waved his palm and several energy cards flew over. Boom, boom. Weller. What are you doing? Logan shouted, but found that Wheeler was staring at the air in the distance, and didn't even respond to his shouts. Is there an enemy there? Logan looked over, but could only see the air, and then his face changed as if he thought of something. Hallucination? Or a mental attack? He suddenly remembered that the professor said that Stryker had a son, a mutant named Master of Illusions. Could it be that Master of Illusions? Damn it. Logan rushed towards Wheeler, trying to wake him up, but the death girl who had just disappeared blocked him and blasted him away again with sound waves. Fuck. Logan cursed, got up from the ground, and rushed up madly. In Wheeler's sight, with the explosion, the enemy who appeared inexplicably was blown away, and his body twisted and was about to merge into the shadows. Wheeler's eyes bloomed with the blue light, and a large number of cards flew out. The fierce explosion sounded again, but the enemy flashed a transparent force field in front of him, and even after blocking his attack, a dangerous red light flashed in his eyes. Whoosh! 2 dazzling energy beams shot out from the enemy's eyes, and Wheeler hurriedly dodged. At this moment, several cold lights suddenly appeared in the air, and the death girl waved her claws and stabbed at Wheeler who had just stabilized his body. Logan raised his claws to block the death woman and shouted to Wheeler, "Leave this woman to me, you go and kill the other one." Wheeler nodded, "Be careful." After that, Wheeler rushed towards the enemy. But in fact, Logan looked at Wheeler who ran away and quickly disappeared from his sight, and his expression became anxious. Chapter 50 The Meaning of 003. Boom, boom. The flying energy cards overwhelmed the enemy again. But when Wheeler saw the enemy set up a defense field to block his attack, his brows furrowed. This guy is a bit difficult to deal with. However, Ororo's battle should be over now. As long as Ororo is free, the battle of others will be over. Wheeler looked back and his expression was stunned. What's going on? Why does Ororo still have so many enemies? There must be something wrong with the new ones. Wheeler's eyes shrank suddenly. He found that even if Ororo's lightning strike killed an enemy, the number of enemies did not decrease. Is it an illusion? A thought flashed through Wheeler's mind, and after seeing the enemy in front of him shoot a laser at him, his body subconsciously dodged to the side. It's very dangerous, it doesn't seem fake. Wheeler whispered, his eyes flashed, and he turned on unlimited defense. The blue alien energy instantly infected the ground under his feet, and through the feedback of energy to the environment, he found that he was no longer in the original place. Sure enough, he was hallucinating. If he didn't use the energy of the other dimension to sense the surrounding environment, he would still feel that everything around him was extremely real. At this moment, a voice with suppressed excitement sounded in his ears. Train, 11, Storm, Wednesday, Broken, Rust. As a series of meaningless words appeared, the scenery in front of Wheeler quietly dissipated, and an old man with glasses and a man sitting in a wheelchair with a dull look appeared in front of Wheeler. The man stared at Wheeler with his green and blue eyes, making Wheeler feel extremely dangerous, as if he could put him into an illusion at any time. Is it Stryker and the Illusion Master Jason? What do those meaningless words that just seemed like gibberish mean? Noticing Stryker's happy expression, Wheeler suddenly had a brainwashed unlucky guy in his mind. Could it be that these words? Take a gamble. Wheeler's eyes became numb and his face was expressionless, as if he had lost his emotions and turned into a cold weapon. Soldier, your number, 003. After getting Wheeler's response, Stryker breathed a sigh of relief and could no longer hide the smile on his face. Success, 003 is in hand. This is a brainwashing method obtained from Hydra. That gentleman used it to control some special experimental subjects. It is more useful than some telepathic abilities. And 003 is one of them. Stryker narrowed his eyes and said, 003, report the invasion of the X-Men. Wheeler said expressionlessly, in a voice without any emotional ups and downs, Firewolf Murat, Steel Warrior Peter, Iceman Bobby, Phantom Cat Katie, and me, Phantom Cat Katie? There is actually another one? Stryker was stunned for a moment, and then he smiled. It seems that 003 is really under control. Jason, it's okay, Stryker said lightly. Jason blinked, and the environment in front of Wheeler changed again. Stryker and Jason, who were standing in front of him, disappeared like bubbles. Seeing this scene, Wheeler's expression did not change at all, but he cursed in his heart. Old fox. Fortunately, he did not remove the unlimited defense just now. Through the feedback of energy to the surrounding environment, He found that the two people standing in front of him were just phantoms. Otherwise, if he had just taken action, he would only attack the phantoms of these two people. Stryker pushed Jason in a wheelchair to Wheeler and walked into the attack range of unlimited defense with a smile. This time, they were real. 003, please give me your orders, Wheeler said coldly, but his eyes suddenly lit up, and a long energy spear shot out from the ground, piercing the Master of Illusion like a hedgehog. What? Stryker screamed, with a flash of fear in his eyes, but energy ropes emerged from the ground and tied Stryker up like a dumpling. Wheeler ignored Stryker and walked to the Master of Illusion. After confirming that the other party was really dead and not an illusion, he removed the unlimited defense and breathed a sigh of relief. This guy's ability is too terrible. The phantoms he created cannot be distinguished between true and false, and people believe it without a doubt. Well, now. Wheeler looked at Stryker, casually pushed the body of the Master of Illusion aside, and smiled. I have something to ask you. Stryker looked at Wheeler in disbelief. How come you are okay? The brainwashing program, an energy rope moved and pierced Stryker's hand like a sharp blade. Now I ask you, Wheeler smiled and said, got it, if the soul is changed, brainwashing will be useless. Stryker nodded with a grim expression. He was careless. Did Professor X do it? No, it won't. In order to guard against psychics, when the power of the mind enters the brain of the brainwashed object, the brainwashing program will be directly activated and then directly attack the psychic. What about 003? Wheeler pondered for a moment and said, what does 003 mean and what does it represent? Stryker was stunned for a moment, and seeing Wheeler's eyes turned cold, he hurriedly said, 003 is your number, which represents infinite possibilities. 003? Infinite possibilities. Wheeler's eyes twitched. How are these two things connected? It would be better to give him an infinite symbol. That's right, Stryker said slowly, it represents infinite possibilities. What does it mean? Wheeler was confused. Stryker grinned because of his wound. Do you know Greek letter pi? Wheeler frowned. Infinite non-repeating decimals. Your mutant ability represents 3. At this point, Stryker's eyes could not help but show a strong desire for research. Wheeler was stunned for a moment. My mutant ability. Isn't his mutant ability the control of alien energy? This ability has infinite possibilities? Wheeler's eyes flickered, and suddenly said, what is my real ability? You don't even know. Stryker looked at Wheeler in surprise. Wheeler said coldly, don't delay, unless you want to die now. Stryker had a cold sweat on his head, and said quickly, according to the information given by that person, your ability is called infinite evolution. Wheeler said impatiently, be more specific. He knew that this old fox was delaying time, but he had to know this information. You can use blood as a medium to absorb the abilities of other mutants, and combine them with your current abilities, and then a new ability mutation will occur. Wheeler frowned. Fusion ability? Make the current ability undergo an unknown mutation. That's right. And this mutation is likely to evolve in a direction that is more beneficial to you. In other words, it is also possible to become worse? Wheeler raised his eyebrows. Stryker's eyes were burning. You didn't have any abilities at first, and your current abilities are the result of the fusion and mutation of several abilities. Hearing this, Wheeler groaned and said, what will happen to those whose abilities are absorbed? Stryker looked playful. That's the material for evolution. What do you think will happen to them? At this time, a dark spot like ink appeared under Stryker's feet and quickly expanded, like a beast's mouth, swallowing Stryker in. Stryker, who quickly sank into the shadows, smiled. His rescue had arrived. But he noticed that Wheeler gave him a cold smile. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.